Hi, this is Paul, and most of you know this guy. We haven't spoken for a while.
That's right.
I had a bunch of ideas. Last time I sort of directed the conversation, so if at some point we're gonna have a conversation and we'll see where it goes. So if you want to lean into me on some things, I don't know, that's fine too. But I thought we'd start with the Symbolic World event,
Oh
Symbolic
yeah.
World Summit, because I didn't get a chance to go down there, and
Hmm.
I'd like to hear about that from your point of view.
Man, it would have been fun if you'd been there. I mean, it was a great event. Lots of this little corner people, lots of Symbolic World people. A surprising number of women showed up. This is the first thing to say. I think that I think there was somebody joking beforehand that there were going to be like two women or whatever, but I mean it was half the people that showed up for the conference, and a lot of honestly, a lot of like you know what they used to call soccer moms here in the US, like that demographic, like, mothers of several, oh gosh, hold on, I just realized that's the demographic I'm in now. Just being like, oh yeah, middle-aged parents with a lot of young oh no. But anyway, we and it was funny. I was talking to one lady about it. She's a local here to Dallas, and but we met for the first time at the conference, and I was kind of joking about, oh, I'm really surprised to find out women listen to my show and everything. And she's like, I listen all the time, but because I'm so busy living life, I don't have time to get in front of a microphone and talk about it on the internet. I was like, aha, yeah, it's quite possible that the people that we interact with, in this space, what you and I are doing right now is maybe um not the whole picture, but anyway, so it was a great time. We had a lot of wonderful people. Obviously, kind of like the highlight of the event was having Jordan Peterson on stage with Father Stephen and them just talking about the bodily resurrection. And of course, I know that, I mean, there was a lot. Anytime Jordan goes places and does things, there's going to be controversy. There was the jacket gate, and I lived through Jacket Gate. And there was, and of course, a lot of people were like, well, maybe Father Stephen didn't push him hard enough, or all these other things, or whatever. But I mean, if you listen to the way Jordan is talking about it now, he's talking about like a real literal resurrection. And so that would be the thing that I'd say. Like, I don't know Jordan super well, although we did get to meet, and that was great. Honestly, can I say this here? I liked him way better in person. Like, I didn't really know. I mean, I don't really listen
I
to
completely believe that.
I
I
don't really
completely
listen
believe
to his
that.
I don't really listen to his podcast because it's just not my jam.
Yeah.
But when I met him in person, he was very receptive. He's a very good listener. He's very kind, much taller than I thought he was going to be. And he just made a huge, like a really positive impression on me in a way that, like, listening to him on the internet never really has.
Yeah.
So I have nothing bad to say about him, but like, I wouldn't have said I was a fan, but it was pretty cool to hang out with him. And my brother, who is a big fan, so we were sitting at that concert we did the first night, and I took a picture with Jordan, sent it to my brother. My brother was like, where are you right now? What is happening? Because I don't usually, burden my family with all the stuff that I do on the internet. But uh, but yeah, so that was pretty fun. But one of the things that I've noticed listening to him since he came out of the summit is that whereas a few years ago Jordan was talking about God as kind of like this impersonal force, or just like, this is the name we give to the highest good or whatever. He's not talking that way anymore. Like, he's talking about a personal God. He's talking about Jesus Christ. And so, you know, God bless him and all of us wherever that goes. But I'm not one of these people who's just like, come on, stop sitting on it's fine. God's used him to do things, and when it's his time, that's I believe it's going to happen. But anyway, so getting to meet him was pretty great. Honestly, it was just as great to meet Jonathan's wife, uh, who was just a wonderful person, and get to see them together. Is like, you sort of like, I've been friends with Jonathan a long time now, and but you don't really know a guy until you see him with his wife, and then you're like, that's the other half of the whole picture. And so getting to meet Jonathan's family and hang out with them a little bit was really wonderful. And we had um it just some great obviously some great talks. I gave a talk on Babel and Pentecost, and we did some panels together and stuff like that. But I think the I don't know. There's a bunch of impressions that as I think about if we're going to do it again, where we'll do it again, when we'll do it again, all those things. um the one of the things, I mean, I think people know this, but one of the things that was announced there at the summit is that Jonathan and I are essentially partners now. We're working on, I'm sort of trying to build up the back end, the business side of the Symbolic world in and so that will also kind of free him up to keep doing the things that he's doing. But anyway, the one of the things that, so when I say, I'm thinking about, are we going to do it again? Where will we do it again? All those things. This is stuff that's on my mind a lot. And the stuff that was most powerful for me was just getting to sit down to people and talk to them and kind of hear their stories and, the crazy places everybody's come from, and we had people just from like all over the world literally came to the summit, and the things that had brought them there and the stuff that they were struggling with, and just had some beautiful conversations with people. Got to spend quite a bit of time at dinner with Annie Crawford and her husband,
Oh,
sort of this little corner
I see
person.
her on Twitter, but I don't
She's
really know
great. You
her.
should really have her on and talk with her. She's brilliant. You gotta get her on and chat. She's really brilliant. She did a course for us on Lewis's Ransom trilogy, for Symbolic World, last year. And but she's just really brilliant. She's a Lewis scholar. She's a classical educator. She lives down in the Austin area here in Texas, I think. But yeah, you should definitely just get her on. I think you'd have a great conversation with her.
She's an
Um,
academic.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. She's an academic, or she's an educator, is the way I would say it.
Okay.
Like I would, I like her too much to call her an academic, but, um, but no, she's great, and we're gonna definitely, hopefully, do some more things with her through Symbolic World in the future. But yeah, you should have her on. She's got a lot of good things to say about the Lewis's Ransom trilogy and other C.S. Lewis kind of things. C.S. Lewis being, of course, the real basis for all Christian ecumenism. And she's also got, yeah, just a lot of great stuff. She's a fun lady. So we had, let's see, what was some other things that I could tell you about. I mean, the biggest thing was doing the Supra, the 2 nights that we were there. So they did a Supra for the VIPs, and then there was a second Supra the following night that was basically just for the staff and people who'd worked the conference. um the second one was the one that Ruslan came to. I don't know if he ever talked about this or talked about this in a video or anything like that. But he came to the second Supra, and of course, I mean, he doesn't drink, and so he looked like he was. I have no idea what he thought about it. I didn't talk to him at all, so I have no idea like what his opinion was. Like all these people, drinking wine, getting emotional, etc. But for people who don't know what a Supra is, though, I mean, it was an incredible experience both times, and it sort of hit me right at a time. I mean, so it's a sort of a semi-liturgical banquet, basically. So you have the tamada, who's the person who's in charge, basically the toastmaster, and then you have somebody who's in charge of pouring the wine, and then everybody else can give toast, but you have to give a toast on the theme of the tamada's last toast. So the first toast always starts out to the Mother of God. It's a Georgian thing, so the first toast always starts out to the Mother of God, and then there are set toasts throughout the night. The tamada can sort of pick things and try to, his goal is basically to try to draw the table together into like unity. And so if he notices, hey, there's some people who aren't getting along, maybe I should make them get along, then he'll like rearrange your seating and he'll move you around. And sometimes you get to drink this like basically Georgian moonshine out of a horn, which is pretty great. The moonshine was not great, but the experience of doing it is pretty great. And obviously there's a lot of food, there's a lot of wine. But it was just a very beautiful experience, and like I said, kind of healing in certain ways. I've been, the last time I was on, we talked a lot about like my family and the kind of the way that I was raised and all that stuff. And it's interesting. Within the last probably 6 months or so, I've just started processing through some layers of that, and just sort of things that I'd basically forgotten or chosen to forget or whatever. And then something would happen, and the word trigger is kind of overused, but in a literal sense, like it was like something happened, and then I would flash back to something from the way that I was raised and be like, I don't know that that was okay, or whatever. And so I was just really kind of struggling with this, and some things that were going on with my family at the time. And so being there at the Tabata and the fellowship there and the toast and the feasting and everything was actually beautifully restorative. And it was just really healing in a big way. The actual best part of the summit, though, was hanging out with Martin Shaw for 4 days.
I believe that. I believe that.
Martin Shaw, like anytime he ever asked me to do anything, anytime, anywhere, I'll be there. Like just a warm, kind, wild, insane,
Yeah.
dangerous, amazing person.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you the two biggest blows to my ego the whole weekend, which are good. Having blows to your ego, especially when you talk in front of people a lot, is very helpful,
Yeah.
I think. The first was when somebody came up to me and said, of course, I had a lot of people coming up and just saying, "Hey, I love universal history," or "Would you do a video on this?" or whatever. Lots of that sort of thing, which was great. Loved it. But this this one guy came up to me and he said, "I really love the stuff you and Jonathan do together. Thanks very much. It's my favorite stuff on Jonathan's channel is the stuff you guys do together." And I was like, "Well, thank you very much. Thanks for saying that, etc." See, because Jonathan, he's like off in the stratosphere and all this stuff. And then he goes, "But you're the logical one." And I was like, "Oh, oh, oh." It was so painful. So painful. So
What did
devastating.
he mean?
I don't know.
I would never have thought that.
I'm the, yeah,
It's so funny people's impressions that
I know. Yeah, I
this
have no idea
crazy
actually what he
machine.
means because I'm like, well, psh, dude, yeah, I'm a pretty crazy person. But anyway, so then the other thing was that Martin came to my talk and we were talking about it afterwards, and he says to me, and I won't try to do Martin's Devon accent, which is a beautiful, beautiful kind of an English accent. But anyway, he says, "Richard, you're a really good preacher, but you're not a storyteller yet." And again, I was just kind of like, oh, oh. And it really, like, not in a bad way, like when you have
No.
somebody who like really cares about you and they speak to you, it can cause you to like reevaluate sort of things and
Yeah.
kind of think about the trajectory of what the things that you're doing and like what's the goal, where's this supposed to go. I mean, there's nothing wrong with obviously being a preacher. You're a preacher. I've been a preacher. Apparently still sometimes, I preach and I can't help it. But but those are sort of different jobs. Flannery
Yeah.
O'Connor certainly thought so. So anyway, um it was just kind of interesting. And so one of the things I've been doing since I got back, everybody had basically assignments that we gave, which was you have to go home and learn one poem, um, like start feasting together with your friends. I did tell everyone to put an icon up in their home. It's a picture of Jesus, but anyway. Um, and although I mean, the funny thing is, even among reformed people, like icons are like trendy sometimes, and I'm like,
Yeah, yeah,
dude,
I know. I see some of my colleagues with them. I'm like, wow. I my
that's
my my
it's a
grandfather.
it's a 2CV right there.
Wow.
Did you ever in the Reformed Baptist kind of circles that I was in when it was trendy, 15, 16 years ago, they would like shorthand all that stuff by calling it a 2CV, a second commandment violation, 2CV.
Oh,
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
never
Yeah,
heard
they
that.
just you be out and you see it sort of became a joke because at first it was just like any religious picture that's a 2CV, and then somebody's like, well, psh, if we're applying it to pictures, we got to apply it to all images. And I know some people like went as far as to say you shouldn't watch movies anymore and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Not many people because I think at some point it just becomes like an illogical way to live. Like you just can't, you know. The great thing about people is that in all of our lives, there's only so much crazy. Like we'll tolerate a lot of crazy in the world around us, but there's only so much crazy which we will personally put up with. Like, and so at some point the dam sort of breaks, and you have to be maybe legitimately insane to fully commit to the final, version of a lot of different ideologies. But anyway, so then it just sort of became a joke. It's like, oh, a nice 2CV of your wife on the wall there, or whatever. But anyway.
Talk to me about what the symbolic world is. My last conversation with Jonathan and my last conversation with John Vervaeke, it was interesting because I didn't really ask them, but both of them sort of unwittingly said, I'm not trying to start a community.
Mhm.
And when I heard that, I thought, huh. But you have obviously a past as a Christian minister,
Yeah.
which and a preacher, which is sort of local church pastors are sort of multi-tools. You have to be.
Yep.
So
Yep.
when you think about the symbolic world, especially now that you have a bigger part to play in it. And it's good that most artists I know can't really run things very well. So it's I'm glad you're there. Um, but tell me about what you think the symbolic world is or what it should be.
Boy, it's like every conversation we've been having the last few weeks.
With who?
Yeah.
With
Oh, well,
Jonathan or
Jonathan and the other people who are involved. We have
okay.
a kind of a core group of really great people who are really committed to putting some time and effort into making the symbolic world. I mean, there's sort of two things, right? There's the symbolic world as such, or like the symbolic world as the thing that Jonathan, and then there's the press, right? And those are actually sort of still kind of distinct entities, and trying to figure out how those two things relate to each other is a very interesting question. I mean, so here's the tricky thing is I have to talk about Jonathan, who's, my partner and my friend and everything else on a channel where he's most certainly going to see this video later. But and it's dangerous to praise somebody to their face, but he's just a wonderful person.
Oh, he
And
is. He
I'm
is.
I'm I just feel uh when you see somebody sort of like handle the worst situation, or when you see them handle stress or whatever, that's when you really learn who somebody is. And I feel really grateful to be working with him. And so my goal right now is to basically I want to make him as successful as possible. That's my goal for what we're doing together is to if we can get the um how do I say this? Anyway, that's my goal. Like as far as like building up the business and everything else
Well,
goes.
what do you mean by successful?
Yeah, that is a good question. I think that Jonathan has some beautiful stories that he's going to be telling. The fairy tale books that he's working on, and God's Dog, and some other things we're hopefully going to work on together in the future. And I think that if we can't be good stewards of those things, and we're not, so I mean people know, I mean this is public knowledge that the Snow White Kickstarter had some major problems associated with it, and that's one of the things that I came in to help with. And so we've kind of worked through that, and everybody's getting their books now and so on, and now we can start thinking about what are the projects that we want to do in the future. But I think that whatever the symbolic world is, I mean, at the end of the day, there's two things that I want. One is I want to see Jonathan be able to tell, and hopefully I get to be involved in this, but I want to see Jonathan to be able to tell these stories that he's working on, and that are so beautiful and life-giving, and that have this capacity to, you could say, um, contribute to the creation of some kind of a beautiful culture. Um, and maybe uh without like serious money and friends in high places and all these different things, it'll probably just be a culture around people's kitchen tables, but that is
Hmm.
more important anyway to me. And I mean, this is a sort of a tangent, but it's one of these things where you so my oldest daughter is 12, and she has lived a by any sort of definition of the word, a sheltered life, in the sense that not in the sense that we don't let her watch movies or listen to music or like whatever, but in the sense that she's lived at home, she's been schooled at home. We have intentionally sort of not exposed her to a lot of things that you're already exposed to by the age of 12 now.
Is she a Swiftie?
She's not.
Okay.
She's not. She has listened to a Taylor Swift song now and then, and I don't really mind that. But also like we've raised her to have good taste. I don't know what else to say. But anyway, so listen, we can talk about the Swiftie thing if you want to. We
Go
can
on.
talk
I'm
about
sorry.
this
I
if you
should
want
not have
to.
interrupted.
No, it's okay. We can come back around to that because I have a couple of fun stories about it. Um, but the reason that but now she's hitting an age where we have to, so like one of her school assignments right now is being um is like basically like keeping a log of current events. And so we were talking about what are some sources we could go to find out what's happening in current events. And so my wife suggests, well, why don't we go to whitehouse.gov and see what's posted there? And so you pull it up, and there's this huge, you know Dr. Jill Biden speaking at a Pride Day celebration or Pride Month celebration,
Picked a
right
heck
on
of
the
a month to follow current
I
events.
oh my gosh. Oh dude, so again, as an aside to my aside, some people complain that I talk this way, but it's the only way I know how to talk is eventually we loop back around to things. As an aside to my aside, uh I was really heavily involved in politics as a teenager. I worked for multiple state representative and U.S. House of Representative campaigns, as well as one state Senate campaign. So I was heavily involved. I walked pavement. I knocked on doors. I worked at phone banks. I stuffed envelopes. I moved packages onto campaign buses. All this stuff. Um, um, the experience and the exposure that I had to the political process and the people who are attracted to it and the people who work in it basically made me deeply cynical about any political party to the point that I more or less refuse to participate in the process now. I say more or less, I do vote at least in local elections, but man, it would take an actual miracle for me to have any kind of and I say this by the way, like well, anyway, it would just take an actual miracle to make me, when like every vote counts, like it and I know all the arguments because I used to make those arguments, but after sort of like seeing the things that I've seen, like it's just very hard for me to be politically involved. But anyway, all that to say, so most of the time I just ignore the stuff. Honestly, I just ignore it. I don't know, what demon tempted me to tune into the debate this last week. That was that was something. I tell you what, that was something.
I didn't watch it. I
I do have a
couldn't have the
personal
stomach
I
for
do
it.
have a personal rule to never publicly criticize a sitting president.
Hmm.
And I started that rule because I got annoyed when other pastors did it from the pulpit,
Hmm.
and and the way that, around a certain time, it's not that Christians shouldn't be involved in politics or anything like that, but it sort of it just really irked me. And so I just decided, well, I'm not going to be a part of that problem, and so I still have that rule. But geez Louise, guys, that was really something. So anyway, there you go. But ooh, so we went to like whitehouse.gov for current events, and of course this, so I'm not going to shelter my child from the fact that, Pride Month is happening and all this other stuff, but also to kind of talk about what is it and what drives it, and is it really about you care about people, or is there a kind of like a cynical, you know, anyway, all these things, and so we're kind of like talking through that, and there was some other stuff. Somehow my daughter got wind of, or was looking over my shoulder or something like that, and saw some images from a church that had been bombed in Gaza, and just started weeping, and she was like, I don't understand, like how could so we anyway, that was an opportunity for us to talk about war and why things happen in war, and and anyway, so I say all this to say my kids are I've tried to give them as good a start as possible, right? But now they're growing up in this world that's deeply horrific and really violent and really ugly and really evil in a lot of different ways. And I think that the stories that Jonathan is trying to tell are uh uh the if not the remedy for all of that, they're at least a vision of um, a light glimmering in a dark wood. Maybe you can make it to that cabin. And so for me, we'll be successful if we can get those things into people's hands, and people can read them to their kids. At the end of the day, that's the thing that really matters to me. So I'm really happy to be a part of that. Um, so that's part of, the press side of things. As far as the community side of things goes, I don't really know. I mean, um, obviously there is a community. Jonathan didn't try to start one, and he really tries not to be like people's guru, which I think is good and healthy. Um, and but obviously there is a community of people. I sort of my natural impulse with things like that is just to let it happen naturally and to not try to force it and to not try to like manage it. And so in that sense, I'm not really worried about it too much. I myself, uh, because I work a lot and because I have a lot of things going on the home front and, involved in my own church and stuff, that's really my community. When it comes to online stuff, like I can never even keep up with, I can't keep up with the discussion forums and what's going on in this little corner and all this different things. And so every time I sort of dip my toe in, I'm like, the discourse has moved on. You guys have new nomenclature for things, and I don't know what the like. Sometimes we like, oh, Paul's dropped a video. I'll go tune in, and like you're using a new term because you sometimes coin new terms for things, and I don't know what you mean by that. I'm like, well,
Yeah.
there's probably like 30 videos I need to go watch to find out like fully what you mean by this, and that's fine. Keep doing the things that you're doing, but it's
I
just one of
totally
those
get that.
things.
You can't go back and watch 30 videos. I completely
Yeah.
understand that.
So like online, my community really isn't online. It's mostly my family and my church and the people that I work with, and that's and so
Which
as
is
far as like
how it should be. I mean, you're
and
not going to
so
get any pushback
yeah,
from me in that.
but the thing is like I do watch, like the so Symbolic World, we do have like a circle community. Like it's a sort of basically a private social network, right? It's really just a forum with private messaging and everything else. So people post things all the time. And a lot of these things are just like wonderful and insightful, and it's got a very it's just a very friendly place. It's just a very friendly place, where whereas well, anyway, and so it's lovely, and I don't really, I do try to read things when I can. I don't usually get involved too much in the discussion just because I don't have the time, but it seemed but there are people like this one wonderful young man who has been running like book clubs, and we did some courses. We just recently did a Dante's Inferno course, and so he was like hosting an after party on Discord after everyone, and I popped in for the last one, and it was fun. Like it was really fun, but also I feel like if I did that sort of thing too much, it would probably kind of ruin the vibe. So anyway, I don't know. I honestly like I think it's really dangerous to kind of like overthink what you're doing sometimes, and dangerous especially when it comes to like building a community or something. It'd be so easy to just disappear up your own, well, and and so in that sense, I just want to tell good stories and make beautiful books, and along the way we're going to do hopefully a lot more courses. The Beowulf course that we did together and the Dante's Inferno course that we did together were both a lot of fun. And it's nice. I like the long form course format because when you're podcasting and I mean, this goes back to what I was saying a moment ago. Like when you're podcasting, there's the sense that you're always sort of starting from zero, because like what if a new guy drops in and now I got to explain this term and things like that. But with the course, you can say, all right, we're all committed, we're all here for the long haul. So over the course of the next 5 or 6 weeks, we can do like a 3 hour series of 3 hour videos where we build iteratively, on these narratives or on these concepts or whatever. So that's how I like to teach. And I really love teaching. It's probably the thing that I love the most in the world. So getting to do that with Jonathan on two things, Beowulf and Dante, which are my favorite things to teach about, other than the Bible, was just awesome. It was just great. So we're gonna do a lot more of that sort of thing, depending on when this video drops. How soon is this video gonna drop, Paul?
I'll be I'll be probably clipping it for the next few days. I leave
Okay.
Thursday, so it'll be out by this weekend. So
Okay. So by then we can announce this. That's why I'm asking. So we've got Vervaeke's going to be doing a course for us, which I'm really excited about. Martin Shaw is also going to be doing a course for us, which I'm really excited about. So I'm sort of trying to put together some good long form kind of stuff for people. So yeah, those are things I'm excited about, and uh, I think one of the things that my dad taught me well was that you'll have the most fulfilling version of your life if you try to focus on making other people successful. And you know what
good.
what success looks like, in this case, like I said, is at the end of the day, I want people to get Snow White, and I want them to get it so that they can, so that they and all the other stories too, so that they can read these stories to their children, so that something beautiful. I mean, man, there was a short story I read. I think it was by Josh Gibbs, but I don't remember now. And it's about this girl who'd kind of like sort of the prodigal son had spent her life in dissipation or whatever. And anyways, she dies. And as she dies, her guardian, for people who don't know, when you die, demons and angels come to fight over your soul. Is a well attested phenomena. But anyway, okay, so she dies, and this angel comes to take her, um uh and sort of is having an argument with the demon, and basically kind of lays out in front of her and in front of the adversary, lays out every beautiful thing, that like every moment, every encounter that she'd had with beauty in her life, right? Not so much things that she'd done, but just times that she'd seen beauty and recognized it, right? And sort of makes this as the case for saving her soul. And the story kind of ends in a sort of ambiguous way, but I think the point is that when Dostoevsky says beauty will save the world, actually, that's not what he says. He says and this is in a book called The Idiot, by the way, where somebody says to the main character, "Didn't you once say, O Prince, that beauty would save the world?" And it's a question, and the question is not answered explicitly
Hmm.
by the character that it's asked to, right? And of course, that is something about beauty, like that's something about beauty itself. Beauty is it is a question, right? It is a question, and so as much as people can have those beautiful experiences of walking into a pre-sanctified liturgy on a Wednesday night in the middle of Great Lent, or reading a beautiful fairy tale, or experiencing beauty in some other way in the natural world and so on, right? As many of those experiences as you can kind of have, those are the palliative for what happened at the debates last week. Those are the remedy for just the absolute like soul corrupting rot gut that is on all of our streaming services now. So I that's I don't know. I like I said, if you ask me things like well, what does success look like to you? I mean, there's the business part of my brain that could break down, here's what it looks like and all that stuff, but at the end of the day, this is what it's about.
What is the speed or process by which storytelling creates universal history?
Huh. Oh boy. Just dropping questions like that. By the way, hanging out with Martin was just disastrous because he would he would just like we'd be driving along in the car and he would just say something like, "This is the most wise thing you've ever heard in your life," and it's just like one sentence long, and he would just drop it in a conversation, and I'm like, "Dude, nobody's recording. You can't say stuff like this right now." But yeah. So how does storytelling turn into universal history? Well, time is of the essence, as it were.
Hmm.
Pun intended, because in this case, time is the essence of this thing, right? So one of the things that I talked about at the beginning of the talk that I gave at the summit was sort of an introduction to the idea of like what universal history is. What do we mean by it? And one of the things that I kind of talked about is how the how the idea of what history is has kind of developed. And so in antiquity, the word historia, was used basically to mean the discipline of knowing something. And so in that sense, you have like that's what I mean, this still survives, for instance, with the phrase natural history, right? Natural history, the Natural History Museum. Well, if you go there, what will you see? Well, you see a bunch of rocks, right? And so on. So in that sense, like the earliest sense of history is the idea of it's a means of knowing, or it's a way of describing how you know things, right? And so then what eventually happens is that a history comes to mean specifically the story of a people, who these people are, and how they got to be who they are, and how they got to know themselves as this particular people. And this is what, in the Middle Ages, when they use the word history, this is what they have in mind, is the story of a particular people. So then the medieval idea of universal history that develops out of that is something like saying, what's actually the story of us as a race, where the race is actually being a Christian. Um, if in the Middle Ages, being a Christian was a, you could say, was a racial identity, right? In the sense of like being an ethnos, or the sense of, I mean, we still have a prayer that I say is part, just most Orthodox Christians will say is part of their evening prayers. Um, and which addresses and I'm aware of my surroundings here when I say this, but it addresses the Theotokos, the Mother of God, as the salvation of the race of Christians,
Hmm.
or the salvation of the Christian race, or the salvation of the Christian people. Sometimes it's translated, but it really is like race, the race of Christians. And the idea, of course, is that if, I mean, it's very literally like she's your mother, like she's the beginning of your line, like of your family or whatever. But anyway, the point is that in the Middle Ages, I mean, there's a famous story of when the Crusaders um were marching into the city of Antioch during one of the Crusades, and somebody standing nearby says, "What race of men are these?" And an angel, or is it some versions Christ, appears and says, "The Christian race." So this the idea that this is its own sort of racial identity. And this, by the way, speaking of Crusades, I mean, this gets weird when you have the, for instance, the Fourth Crusade, when they end up sacking Constantinople, right, which is a Christian city. They end up sacking Constantinople, and I mean, it basically happens. It's not. This is one of these things where, like, it's not really the Pope's fault. It's sort of the people who were on the expedition themselves, and they sort of like they were like, man, there's a huge opportunity here for us, economically speaking, right? And but then they justified it to the lay people, right? They justified it to the ranks of the Crusaders by basically saying, "Listen, these guys aren't really Christians. They say the creed wrong. They cross themselves different from us. They wear these funny hats, like all these different things." And it caused the shift where, I mean, people forget that up until the modern era, and actually still even in the modern era, there used to be significant chunks of Italy, at one point about half of it, that were basically Greek Orthodox, right? And there's still that community is still there, and it's actually been growing in recent years, I think. But um, and there were people like certain popes who like hired a bunch of Normans to come in and kill all of those people and take over their land and everything. But the community survived. But anyway, I'm just saying it's not an unusual thing actually for people even in what we'd sometimes think of as the West, which the whole like East and West um terminology I don't like anyway, because I think it's really reductive. But the but the point is that it wouldn't have been unusual for somebody who came from the West to have seen uh Greek Christians, Eastern Christians, Orthodox Christians, whatever you want to call them, and to up till that point to have still thought of them as being Christians. And it's not to say there wasn't violence or things between the communities on occasion or whatever, but what's really new at that moment is when people leading the Fourth Crusade say, these guys aren't even Christians, so it's okay, right? We can do to them what we were planning on doing to the infidel, right? That's the sort of the change that happens there. So
Hmm.
I got off on a little bit of a tangent, but my point is that time is an important part of the picture. So it goes from being a way of knowing to a way of knowing us as a people, and then universal history becomes a way of knowing the Christian race, the Christian people. What does it mean to be a Christian? And that's what universal history is about. I mean, it really, you can make different arguments about when it starts, but one of the starting places is uh Augustine's The City of God, but then responses to and commentaries on the City of God that then try to basically further the argument that he's making
Hmm.
by saying, now let's take that and let's apply it to actually pagan histories and chronicles, and kind of synthesize them together to kind of develop on this theme. So that's one of the first universal histories. That's one of the ones that I talked about at the summit. But um, so there's a I think I lost my train of thought. But anyway, my point is that it becomes universal history when it starts trying to say, let's take the story of our people and integrate it into the story of the Christian people. And this is probably one of the secret motivations of the whole thing for me, which would be to get people to start sort of thinking of themselves in those terms again.
Hmm.
And so there's a part of me that would like to be able to sort of think of myself as uh well, not a part of me, it's the main part of me. Uh Wants to live in continuity, wants to live in continuity with the past. And one of the big things that kicks off the Renaissance is this idea that is to go from the idea of continuity to the idea of there's been a hard break, there's been some kind of a rupture. And then you could say after that, now we need to get, back to the sources, right? But the back to the sources for them meant we've got to go back to antiquity because there's been some kind of a rupture between us and the world of antiquity. But in the Middle Ages, up to that point, that's not how people saw it. Like Dante did not see, I mean, nobody reading Dante would think of him as considering himself living in a state of rupture with antiquity. He's living in continuity with it, and that's why he's able to integrate it into his Christian faith and everything else. Which whenever you're taking new people through Dante, that's always the first thing they're confused by. It's like, wait, what God does Dante worship? Well, that's actually not really in question, but he makes a very frequent and one could almost say Pauline use of the pagan poets and integrating them into what he's doing. And so he sees himself as not living in rupture, but actually in deep continuity, not just with the early church, which is what you're concerned with if you're one particular kind of person there at the dawn of the Reformation, or with classical antiquity if you're a different kind of person. But he sees himself actually as in continuity with all of those things. So that's what, for me, that's what the project is about. Is it's not about just LARPing as a medieval person or something like that. I think there are obviously some implications, practices that should be revived, and other things should be discarded, and so on. But it's more about if you can conceive of yourself first of all living in a sense of continuity, then you're at least in a place where you can be generous to your ancestors. So,
Well, it's also figuring out who your ancestors are. So, I'm about to embark on a trip where I will get a sense of the, I'll get a sense of, this world, this old world
mhm.
where, you dig around, there's these standing stones over here, and you dig around and there out comes a statue, and let's put them all in the Vatican Museum. Um, and obviously there's a continuity is happening. Now it's interesting because we before I started recording talked about weddings. It just had a wedding in May, got another wedding coming up next month. And what's interesting is that one of my new daughter-in-law, the my first daughter-in-law is from Louisiana.
Mhm.
And when I sit and I talk to her, which isn't too far from you in terms of distance
No,
in
I
America.
was just we just did a little. I'll circle back around to this in a second when we talk about ancestors, but we just did a little drive through the deep south and spent a little time in Louisiana.
But when I talk to you, unlike when I talk to her, you don't have an accent.
Oh,
You
that's what you think.
well, I don't hear it now.
So
You're not.
this is not my native accent. I am doing right now what is referred to in the annual sensitivity training that I have to take for work as masking. Um, so
Oh,
the so I'm from East Texas, which is the west side of Bayou country.
yeah,
So
yeah,
much more in
yeah,
common with Louisiana than
yeah.
California, for instance.
So why are you masking?
So it's a thing that I do because I've lived in Dallas for a long time, which is pretty cosmopolitan, and I went to school with people from other countries and so on. And so there's a sort of like a natural leveling that happens. But if you drive me literally just an hour east, for 2 weeks while we were on vacation recently, driving through the deep south, I was talking like this the whole time, which is actually how people more or less talk where I'm from. So I do have an accent, but it only sort of comes out if I'm around other people with it.
Yeah.
Like if I'm around people from home, or I'm around my siblings, or I'm around my dad's family, or if I'm just out that way, then the accent will kick in. So
It's interesting because growing up, we grew up in New Jersey, and my mother was from Massachusetts. And I
mm,
would notice as a kid that the closer we got to her home in Massachusetts, the more her accent would come back. And it was because it was completely unintentional on her part, but just as a kid, it's like
Yep.
because my cousins all talk
It's the
that
same
way.
thing. It's the same thing for me. It's a geographical thing.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
how do you integrate? I mean, part of the difficulty, this sort of gets into a lot of the questions I have around now the coming of orthodoxy in America, which is an item of interest for me. It's not necessarily an item of personal concern, is that I'm not making my way to orthodoxy. But as I watch this process and as I think about what this means,
I just wiggled my eyebrows suggestively for everybody at home to be like, oh, that's what you think. That's what you think, Pastor Paul. Anyway,
I
anyway,
just before getting on here, I made a video because there's a there's a there's a guy named Christian Golden who has made a bunch of videos, and I've talked to him
that
a
can't be
bunch
a
of
real name.
times. What's that?
That can't be a real name.
That is in fact his real name.
It's like
And my
Richard Rohlin. Like who would?
yeah, Christian Golden. That is in fact his name.
Okay.
And he was talking with someone else in the corner about how Pastor Paul just doesn't really have any respect for like charismatics. And it was like, "Oh, you don't understand me at all. I'm if I had no vocational tethers to a church at all, I would probably be much more in a black or charismatic service." That's sort of
That's weird. I don't really see you as somebody with upper arm strength.
So anyway, so but part of what I'm getting at is we live in this strange, but we're living in very strange places, because not only are you in Dallas, do you
Mhm.
mask your accent? And my daughter-in-law doesn't do it so well, and she's just so absolutely delightful. We love her with all our heart. Um, she can't mask her accent. It's she's just
And I don't
absolutely.
mask it intentionally, by the way.
No, I know you don't. That's the point. I mean, we slip into these things, and I don't have a Jersey accent. I don't have a Massachusetts accent. I
Yeah.
Every now and then some people hear a little word and they'll look at me like, "You from New Jersey?"
So if you hang out with me a lot, it'll slip into phrases like this dog won't hunt, or now we're cooking with gas, or that really grits my gourd. I say these things all the time actually. Because my dad said them, because his dad said them, and so
Right.
on, right? But it's just sort of um yeah, so it's one of those things. It sort of slips out more, a couple of beers, tell you what, that'll
But my point is, we are living. It's sort of hard in America to figure out what are we attached to.
Mhm.
And I'm old enough that I think this gets more into Grim Grizz territory. People were attached to the entertainment and the stories that they saw on the three big networks and whatever was sort of going
Yeah.
through at the time. And of course, now with the internet is weird because in some ways things have been fractionated further. Yet, whenever you fractionate, you also have to homogenize to some degree so that you can actually maintain something together, or at least try to.
Yeah, of course.
So how does if you had to, where in universal history would you be located? And I mean, would it be tied to East Texas? Would it be, I don't know, we back Scotch Iris? Is that where?
So this is, if I had a good answer to this, I would give it to you. But instead, you have to put up with another story
I like
because
stories.
is the only way. I mean, this is a deeply Southern thing, is my inability to give a brief answer. Um, so I have been for several years now, but mostly like very intensely this last year, I've been working on putting together basically a family tree for my family and for my wife's family. And I'm building off of a bunch of research that my aunt did. And I by the way, that's an affectation right there. When I say aunt,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's just an affectation. I didn't grow up saying that way, and I don't normally say I would normally say aunt. But it's one of those things where where there's another word in English that sounds like ant. So sometimes it can be confusing when I'm talking to the kids. And so I try to different anyway. There are different reasons why you code switch. It's not always because you just want to sound more highfalutin.
Right.
It's a good Southernism. But it's sometimes it's for clarity. But anyway, so my aunt has been doing a ton of work on family tree stuff, and so I've been kind of picking up on her work and whatnot, and then also taking some stuff that my wife's grandfather has done and kind of putting together her. So wife's family is very German, super German,
Oh.
so German they might have invaded France for dinner at one point in time, but no, they came over in the middle of the 19th century, which is when a lot of Germans were coming over
Yeah.
and settled in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, just like most Germans
Yeah.
who came over at that time. There's some fun stories in there. I think that she has some kind of a great uncle or something like that who's killed because he was run over by like the Budweiser wagon, which is while
Well,
drunk,
I should
of
I
course.
shouldn't laugh, but
Well, no, it's
it is a
terrible, but
funny
also
story.
it's just like that's the most Indiana way there is to die. Like I don't know anything more Midwest than that. Um, she has a distant ancestor, a woman back in the old country, back in Germany, who was tried and burned at the stake for witchcraft.
Wow.
And when she was being burned about to be burned at the stake, and they were taking her off, and she said, "I'm innocent. God knows I'm innocent. And if I'm innocent, then after I'm dead, this fence post," and she points at just a fence post, "is gonna bloom like a tree." And so they burn her at the stake and everything. As they're coming back from the event, the fence post has in fact bloomed. I mean, this is the story, but so of
It's just
course,
kind of think of which would say. I mean, but
well, I mean,
anyway,
it's the sort of thing where or they're like, okay, well, saint or witch.
right.
There's no other option here. So anyway, putting together some stories like that. My side of the family, it's kind of interesting. I was always told that we were German.
Hmm.
And I think it's because of what my dad had always been told. And it's true that my dad's side of family my dad's family um did come from Germany in like the 1840s. And but if you could say like three out of four branches of the family, and actually they weren't ethnically German though, they were ethnically Scandinavian,
Hmm.
which is something that I discovered. And then, but then like the other three out of the four branches of the family, like if you take my four grandparents, right, were all Scotch Irish. They all settled, and some English in there as well, but and they all settled in the American South in the 17th century.
Wow.
So my almost my entire family has been in the American South, starting in the Carolinas, and then there's basically essentially three large migration groups, and my families were part of all three of them that eventually ended up in East Texas. So in that sense, my people have been here for about 300 years, longer than America's been a country.
Yeah.
And this leads to some sort of interesting things. So for instance, I have an ancestor who was uh, was a cavalry officer during the recent unpleasantness uh, during the American Civil War, and he was a cavalry officer for the Confederacy. And if you look at a picture of him, he looks exactly like me. I'm not even kidding. I will send you this picture later.
I believe you. You kind of look like a Confederate
Yeah,
cavalryman.
that's
You
fair.
really
That's
do,
fair.
with the beard especially. I mean,
Yeah. Well, that's the funny thing is he's got the same beard that I have. And things like this, by the way, make me really uncomfortable, and I will tell you why. Um, I don't know if you've ever had the weird feeling like maybe there's only 12 people in the world. Like like how do I say this? So sometimes when I'm out or I'm at like a conference or at a big work thing, you start to look around the group and you start to notice, gee, lots of these people just kind of look like each other. And all the people that look this certain way, like they're this tall and they have this nose and this shape of a mouth or whatever, like have the same personality. And that leads to some very uncomfortable conclusions. You're gonna start to wonder, like, well, like, did I choose to be this person? Or am I just this person because I'm a tall man with these genetics and people treated like, I don't know, like all kinds of nature versus nurture questions. It's weird. I
Yeah.
had one of these moments. I was out on at like a work training thing last week. I was looking around the room and just realizing, man, everybody that, like looks a certain way, they also, and this is not a race thing. I'm talking about like way more specific things, like, like the shape. Well, I know like phrenology used to be a big thing, like the shape of people's skulls and stuff. But I'm just like, I'm talking about like general builds,
Yeah.
like where guys with this build tend to have this personality. And
Yeah.
what's that about?
Yeah.
That's a little, that's a little weird. It's a
Yeah.
little weird. Um, but anyway, so you look at something like this and you're like, well, dang, the apple did not fall from the tree here. It's like, when you find an ancestor that's like exact, and I found another female ancestor in the same branch of the family who looks exactly like one of my sisters. It's unsettling. It's unsettling. So anyway, but I think this guy and I would have got along. He in the picture he's got two big Bowie knives in his belt, and I'm like, I've been known to own a Bowie knife or three, so I actually used to hunt wild pigs with knives. And so yeah, so and again, like I just feel like he probably did that too. So listen, I'm way more redneck than people think I am, Paul. Like I don't know what to.
One, I now wild pigs are not, that's not like hunting little birds.
Well,
Wild pig is a fearsome beast.
but it's fair because the pig also has knives on his
Right,
face.
right,
So
right.
it's sort of like it's
No,
fair.
I'm not arguing for the pig. I'm just saying, if I'm dealing with a wild pig, and you're using a knife, that's up close and personal. It's kind of a fair fight.
It is up close and personal. And of course, like we have dogs and stuff like that to like flesh them out, and then
Yeah,
bulldogs to basically corner them, and then you
yeah.
you come up and try to I mean, I have to be careful about what I say here on the internet because if I start describing how much I enjoy this, you guys will start to think I'm some kind of a
Well, then I'll get a
sociopath.
little label under my video.
Yeah,
I don't
exactly.
know
But
what label you're gonna provoke, but
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I'm but I mean, again, these are the things, I used to do this with a buddy of mine. He's an Army Ranger captain from Alabama, and he had the dogs, and we just go out. I mean, my K bar is right over here actually, and we'd go out and the crazy thing is we did this in the middle of Dallas. So there's a huge river that runs through Dallas called the Trinity River, and it has all these huge watersheds, which are not, you can't build there. So they're just massive public parks, like thousands and thousands of acres of public park, kind of all across the Trinity watershed going through the Metroplex. So, and you have for people who do not know, this will not be impressive to you because you live in California, but the DFW Metroplex has more people than most states of the union. Like it's not as bad as like LA or freaking Houston. Hate Houston, but sorry, Houston people. Um, I almost had a nervous breakdown driving through Houston once. I was just like, it's not gonna end. The concrete's never gonna stop. So like basically that's my metric for this is too much. I can't do it anymore. But anyway, so there's these massive parks all across the watershed, and what people don't know is that, and of course, like people are jogging through them, taking their kids there during the day, but the brush back around the river is full of wild pigs, which we have a huge problem.
that is a
Yeah.
huge problem.
Actually, it used to be in the South, now it's across the entire country, but massive. I mean, we're talking, dozens and dozens of wild pigs. And so what we would do is we'd go there and we get there at like 2 in the morning when the park is closed. And we use the dogs to, again, like we send them into the brush, they'd flush the pigs out. There was this one big, I mean, this is like a Moby Dick kind of a story. There was this one huge sow out like an albino, like completely white, massive, biggest pig I've ever seen. And we never could get her. We never could catch her. She was always just too smart. We'd always end up like with one of the with one of her offspring basically, but she would always elude us, despite the fact that she was massive and impossible to miss even in the middle of the night. Somehow she always got away. So Moby Pig is out there, people. Anyway, like I just feel like you challenged me on my southernness,
And
and now I gotta.
Martin Shaw. We're gonna have to clip this one for Martin Shaw because Moby Pig. There's some good story in that. There's
Well,
some
yeah.
good
I mean,
story
this
in
is
there.
the thing is like Southerners are a very storytelling people,
Yeah.
and the same thing with my mom. You can't get a fast I love my mom mom's never going to listen to this, but if she did, just gonna say I love my mom, but everybody knows that you can't ask my mom. You can't just like call my mom and ask her a quick question. That's a half an hour phone call minimum. That's just the way that it is. And it's because if you ask us a simple question like, so what it was, where are you in your universal history? You're gonna get 40 minutes of me talking about pig hunting. But I mean, so all this to say, so one of the fun things that I did as part of the family tree stuff was I did one of these DNA tests, and of course everybody was like, don't go getting that DNA test. The government's gonna get you. It's like, dude, if you think the government does not already have my information, I don't know what to tell you. But so I did a DNA test, and there were some surprises on there. One is, I found out there's no German DNA at all, at all. So that was a little surprising to me. But it's funny because when I was in Europe, and people would ask, the last time I was over in Europe, people would ask where I was from, and I would say, well, I'm from Texas. So no, 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 where your people from? And it's like, oh, well, I think they're from Germany. They look at me and it's, no, you're not German. It's like, I was like, oh, okay. Well, what do you think I look like? Like after like the third time, I was like, well, what do you think I look like? And they're like, oh, you're Scandinavian. And then turns out that's basically I'm Scandinavian and Scotch Irish. That's almost everything except for 1% Nigerian. I know. And this is one of and so I did some research on this because I thought, well, maybe that's an error or something. It turns out it's not an error. It's almost impossible for it to be an error because they're like Northern European DNA and then like Sub-Saharan African DNA is different enough that they won't get confused for each other. But it turns out this is very common in the South for obvious reasons. Um, and 1%, by the way, means that you have an ancestor with that DNA 7 to 8 generations back. That's what 1% on anything in DNA test, that's what it means. So I did some digging around this and I found that sure enough, on one particular side of my family, and because other members of my family have done DNA tests as well, I could find the ones that had it and the ones that didn't and actually kind of narrow it down. And so on one side of my family, on basically my dad's mom's side of the family, there was a freed slave about 7 or 8 generations back. And so
Wow.
that's also a part of my story. So it's one of these things everybody forgotten about it, but it's to me, I mean it's just very interesting. So the first answer is, um and there are a lot of other stories I could tell you. I'm actually descended from a fairly famous Ulster Scot settler, um who he's called William the Immigrant McClung, because he was a Quaker and he had so many descendants, like because he married 3 different women and then they all died, but he'd married 3 different women. They all had like 12 kids or something. So like almost every McClung like in America is descended from this guy, including a distant cousin of mine who almost gave us zombie George Washington. Did I tell you about this?
No.
Okay, this is another good story. I'm really sorry for what I'm doing to your channel today. When
Have you watched the Freddie and Paul show? What do you mean what you're doing to my channel?
So when so this guy was his name was also William McClung. He was George Washington's personal physician. He was also the first patent officer
Huh.
of the United States of America. You can look him up, like chief patent officer. You can look him up on Wikipedia. But actually, he's famously invented a bunch of things he didn't really invent because when people would come to him with patents, he'd be like, "Well, unless you put my name on this, the paperwork's going to get lost. I don't know what to tell you, And so he'd sort of like scam people into sharing the rights of their inventions with him, which is pretty fun, I guess. I know. And but so he was also George Washington's personal. Oh, he also was the original architect for the U.S. Capitol building. Like, is one of these polymaths, like very physician, all these different things. Anyway,
And a
so
little
he's
corrupt.
and a little corrupt. I mean, like, what's a little corruption between friends now? I mean, come on. Um, and so he was one of George Washington's personal physicians, and when Washington was on his deathbed, they called for him, but he didn't get there in time. So he gets there, and they're like, "Oh, President Washington's already died." And he said, "No problem. I have a plan for this." So his plan was to ice Washington's body down immediately, or it had been iced down immediately on his death. So his plan was to use like a bunch of blankets and like a water system and everything to slowly thaw Washington's body. While doing that, they would give him an infusion of lamb's blood, basically replace all of his blood with lamb's blood and like do some other things to resuscitate him. And his plan was just to bring Washington back to life. And everybody said, no, we're not going to let you do that. But to his dying day, like he wrote about this later on in life, to his dying day, he believed that it would have worked. So
he couldn't try it on a slave or a regular guy or something.
yeah, well, it's who else are you going to try it on? This guy's already dead. I don't know what, like so.
Well, people die every day. I mean, if you really got a plan and you want to do this, you wouldn't think you'd be terribly hard to find somebody to say.
If you believe in like a multiverse theory, like you have to think somewhere out there, Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer and zombie George Washington, like that's a thing. That's the thing that happens. So I don't know.
I should just clip that and put that right at the front of the video. And here we have, yeah.
It'd be good. It'd be good. So anyway, I've been doing a lot of this research. It's been really interesting. It's also been actually, it's an interesting thing because, Martin has kind of been a part of this in a certain way, in helping me kind of reconnect with the old world and with my Celtic roots and everything else. But at one of the Supras the second one that he came to, he and I were sitting next to each other, and I'd been kind of, I think, pretty down on myself that particular day because this is a thing that I do struggle with. Like, the whole thing that got me started on the path that made me become the person that I am is the fact that I lived in this really gray, like I've described it sometimes as like aggressively beige fundamentalist world, in which everything that would confer identity upon you as far as like the tangible assets of culture had been stripped away. Right. And so like at that point it's like, well, who am I? What am I? And then and I think I talked about this before, but I have a lot of Chinese family members because of my grandparents' missionary work and things like this. And so I would look at them and like their house full, and like even when my mom decorated her house, like she used Chinese decor for everything, right? And so then it's like, well, it still does, by the way, and it's very beautiful and everything, but also it's kind of like, well, am I Chinese? Like, what's my identity? Like, and there's nothing there, right, to really sink your teeth into. And that's, part of what drew me towards the past is like trying to answer these kinds of questions for myself. So I've been talking to some people, and some people at the summit were also kind of wrestling with this. So they were asking me questions, much like the question that you've asked me. And there is one answer which I still think is true, and it's the answer that I gave, but is to say that we're going to have to start by seeing ourselves as first and foremost part of the Christian race, right? I am a Christian. That's the thing that I am first and foremost. And and I know that, like there's this whole discussion around like Christian nationalism and all this other stuff going on. And that's not really what I mean by this. I mean, it's really finding your identity in Christ, but also as part of that being connected to this chain of other people who have also been Christians, who may not have looked like me. They may not have believed the same things that I believe. They may not have, like their lives may have been very different in many different kinds of ways, but we're connected by Christ, and we're connected by the blood of the martyrs, and we're connected by the tradition that's been passed down. And so all of that to say, I kind of gave this answer, but because I was also dealing with some stuff from my childhood and my family and everything that same weekend, like I just wasn't happy or whatever. And I think Martin's pretty intuitive about these things. So at some point he got up and he made this toast, and it was something to the effect of, I'm here today looking at you. You left me, like your people left my people 400 years ago. And now I've come across the ocean to be standing in front of you, looking you face to face. And that's actually pretty wonderful. And so to all of us who stayed, to all of you who left, cheers, something like that. It was really beautiful.
That's
really,
beautiful.
Really heartwarming. And kind of helped me grapple with some of these things. So, I mean, so the answer to your question is I don't, first of all, I don't totally know.
Yeah.
I don't totally know where I fit into things, and I'm more or less okay with that right now. I think that part of what everybody is getting to experience as I do the Universal History Project is to see me work through this stuff for myself.
Mm.
I don't know what the terminus of that is. I know that the Orthodox Church is a really essential part of it. One of the
Mhm.
things I love about Orthodoxy is the way that it does come with a tangible material culture, which is for Orthodoxy is a dogmatic, position, you could say,
Mhm.
but it's just the way that everything is sort of embodied physically. And it's interesting because I converted, but my kids have grown up in it. And so this is their life. This is what they know.
Yeah.
And it's very natural, even, to watch a little baby like, toddle into church as soon as they can walk and kiss an icon. Why are they kissing Jesus? Because this is what else would you do? Right? Like,
Yeah.
what else would you do? And
Yeah.
so that's and there are certain things, because of the repetition of the liturgical cycle. And I would say one of the things that was really positive from my upbringing was a huge emphasis on the Psalms,
Mhm.
which is almost all we sing and pray in the Orthodox Church. And so there's a part of the Psalms that really I've always felt like are really, my native home. And this should be for all Christians. I mean, I don't know how many songs Taylor Swift has composed, but I can tell you there are people out there who have them all memorized. But there's only 150 Psalms, people, so there's nothing stopping you. Nothing stopping you. And so there are certain things that about Orthodoxy that when I came to it, I felt really natural for me. It really felt like this is home because of the Psalms mainly, and because of the scriptures, and because of the way there's something there's something about the experience of life that the Celtic people who came and settled in the United States, of course, their lives were very hard. And obviously that whole, I'm not trying to, like, I don't know, glorify or whitewash or whatever, like the past of the American South or anything like that. But it's certainly the case. Most of these people who came over, they were not wealthy. They were sharecroppers, and they, were some often slaves themselves when they first came and everything else. And the Psalms, I mean, there is like a sort of a Gaelic way of chanting the Psalms that became basically part of like what we now think of sort of like Appalachian music, right? Comes from that. And so there is something in Orthodoxy and in the sort of like the if I'm not suffering, how do I know that God loves me? Kind of like there's something about Appalachia, and there's something about the that experience that really resonates well with Orthodoxy. And I think that
Hmm.
is why that's part of why Orthodoxy is exploding in the American South right now. I mean,
Hmm.
relatively speaking. And during our road trip, like we stopped at a bunch of Orthodox parishes along the way because I just wanted to see what's happening at other places and what are people doing. And so we, Shreveport and Greenville and all these other
Yeah.
cities in the American South, and everybody's growing, everybody's building new buildings that are already full. And there is something that's happening, and it's, I mean, it's really something to be, like the backwoods of South Carolina or whatever, and see
Yeah.
people coming to the Orthodox faith. These people have never read the church fathers, or they didn't pick up, they didn't read their way here,
Yeah.
but they came in and they said, there's something in this that speaks to something in me, right?
Yeah.
There's a parity of soul here. And so that's part of it too. That's part of it too. And I don't exactly, know what the I don't know the answers to anything, um but I know that where I am right now, that's a part of the answer.
Mhm. Mhm. Taylor Swift. Tell me about Taylor Swift.
My girl T Swift. Yeah.
I don't know much about her. I learned what I know about Taylor Swift. I'm learning from Burn Power and a little bit now from my new daughter-in-law. So
Oh boy. Okay.
I can't name a single song.
So
So I'm living
I
in
I
oblivion
know
here.
I'm we're gonna be the two grumpiest old white guys talking about things we don't understand here, because I also do not know very much about Taylor Swift.
Oh, okay.
Um,
But it sounded
but
like you had opinions.
well, I do. I mean, she looks like she's made out of plastic. That's my opinion. But the no, no. So let me. I have a story. I don't have opinions. I just have stories,
Is
folks.
Taylor
Just
Swift
stories.
a human being? Is she maybe
Mhm.
maybe
I am gonna send you the most amazing article that is ever. You know what? Can we just read some parts of it?
Sure, go ahead.
Oh my gosh, you're gonna love this.
Let me
This is just, it has some of the greatest sentences which have ever been written in the English
all
language.
right, you can share your screen if you want to do that. It's
Well,
up to
hold on,
you.
I gotta pull it up. So give me like, I'm not gonna share my screen. I'll just read you a couple of excerpts.
Okay.
The article is called "Taylor Swift Does Not Exist."
Oh.
It's Sam Chris, Kriss, samchris.substack.com. Um, the article is like a little not safe for work, so I'm not going to share my screen.
All
There's some
right.
strong language in it, but it does have just some amazing sentences in it. Although the one I have in mind is actually from another article of his called "The Internet Is Already Over," in which he says, this will give you a sense of his writing style. He says, remember the Internet of Things, your own light bulbs blinking out ads and seizure-inducing Morse code, your own coffee machine calling the police if you try to feed it some unlicensed beans. Remember the metaverse, the grizzly pink avatar of Mark Zuckerberg, bobbing around. Oh, wait, I didn't read the whole end of the thing. It's again a little not safe for work, but geez Louise, you can cut that out. But it's an amazing article. And actually,
We'll
like,
do the we'll do that. Who's that? Is it Aquinas for breakfast or coffee or something
yeah,
like
finds the
that? Where
Aquinas, yeah.
blasphemy thing that they did to Jordan
That thing was
Peterson?
so funny. I thought you actually made quite a good point there, by the way, when you were talking about it. That was so funny to me. I do actually self-censor you when I would see things. Part of that is just my genteel Southern manners, is like, I'm like, oh no, sorry, it's a bad word. Um but it's good because then when you have to swear, it's actually like impactful. But anyway, Um, so this article, Taylor Swift doesn't exist, starts out with this just like generally talking about the phenomena, and then ends into like weird writing in Aramaic, and maybe she's actually Lilith from the, Jewish mythology stuff. It is it starts out like this interesting cultural critique, and then it becomes increasingly unhinged. And I don't know if that's a bit, or if this guy wrote it while he was imbibing, or like, I don't know what the deal is. Um, one of the most famous works on the Icelandic sagas, which obviously everybody's read. One of the most famous works about the Icelandic sagas is a book that's written, I think, in Danish, but it's been, I think, translated into English. But anyway, it's chapter after chapter after chapter of this guy doing the thing that I'm always trying to do, which is like help you get into the head of people from the Middle Ages or whatever. But then he gets to the very end and he says, and now I'm going to reveal how I know all of this. And he talks about the time he was staying in a hotel in Reykjavik and a ghost showed up and just told him all of this stuff. And I remember asking a professor at the time, it was like, so is this a bit? Or like, what's the deal here? And he was like, no. He really, but it's okay. We still like the book. And I was like, all right, sure. Okay. Um, but yeah, it's a bizarre article. It's very funny. I gotta look and see if I can find something that's not gonna get your channel demonetized, but I can actually read out loud. It's so, yeah, I mean, he says things like, um, here we go. Uh You might have recently heard that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, via SoftBank Kabushiki Gaisha, via its wholly owned subsidiary Gannett, which owns the USA Today, alongside a sad little clutch of failing syndicated local newspapers, has hired the world's first full-time Taylor Swift reporter. His name is Brian, and I'm deeply upset. Not because I don't think Taylor Swift is worth writing about. Taylor Swift is, by any sensible measure, the most famous person in the world. The actual leaders of actual countries beg her to visit their dying lands, put on a show, make their miserable people spend some more of their miserable money, and maybe nudge the whole economy just a few points out of recession. When a war breaks out in Asia, both sides immediately try to argue that they're fighting on the side of Taylor Swift. She's bigger than Elvis, bigger than the Beatles, bigger than God. She has blasted herself on a jet of pure, sugary Americana into every quiet crevice of global culture. She provides the texture of daily life for 13-year-old Indonesian girls with hijabs and hard scraping eyes. There are swathes of rebel bushland in Central Africa where children tear the guts out of the earth at gunpoint, and the central government has no power at all, but Taylor Swift does. In my travels across China, the only Western music you'll ever hear playing anywhere belonged to Taylor Swift. She's not a solitary human being, she's Coca-Cola. She has fundamentally changed the inner workings of the record industry, show ticketing, intellectual property. Why not? Let's say music theory too. She invented tone. She invented pitch. Taylor Swift seems destined to be remembered by our drooling, mud-eating descendants as a kind of culture hero, the mythical source of everything left for them to inherit. First was she who plucked strings and made pleasant sounds, who taught men to spin thread and mark the hours of the sun, she who scatters the stars in the sky. She's kind of a big deal. So there's a sample of his writing style.
Wow.
It's a killer article, and I think if you sort of read through the insanity of it all, he makes some really interesting points. But the Taylor Swift thing is interesting to me, not really because I have sort of any interest in the woman herself, but I think the point he's trying to make is that the person that we all know as Taylor Swift is not a real person. It's not a real
Right.
woman. It's a
Right.
very carefully packaged, kind of a thing. And yeah, so that's, I mean, so it's funny because I used to have this buddy, still have this buddy who won't watch this, so I'm going to talk about him. No, it's okay. He'll laugh alongside with me. But I had this buddy who, in the early days when she first was kind of hitting big, which was like 12 years ago or something like that. He got like really into her music, and basically we just shamed him ruthlessly as young men will do, you know. And but I have siblings who have also like really gotten to her stuff at one time or another. Now they're like, oh no, I'm over that or whatever. Before, now she's kind of phony or whatever. And so there is like a sort of like a wave of Swifty hipsters, who are kind of like um
They're
sort of
too
like, oh,
cool.
I was into
They're
her
too
before
cool
she
for
was cool, but
Taylor.
yeah, exactly. But I think that one of the things that's really interesting, this is really what I wanted to say. One of the things that I think is really interesting is the way that people talk about their experience when they go to a concert. That's the thing that I'm actually really interested in.
Hmm.
Um, because one of the phenomena that's been widely reported is that people sort of lose track of time at her concerts. And so they go to a concert, and then when they come back, like when the concert is over, they don't really remember anything that happened through the whole experience. And there was this little article that somebody published on their Substack. By the way, it seems like everybody has it. Are we missing out on Substack? Like what's going on? Everybody has one now. Feel like I
Yeah.
feel like I missed the
Yeah.
boat on this. But I can't handle the pressure, by the way, to like try to publish something witty every day. That's just too much.
No,
This is
no.
also the reason I don't even do my own channel. I like coming on and talking with people, but
That's
I
much
don't
better.
like the
Don't
pressure of
don't
like
don't worry about the Substack thing. Don't worry about
pressure
it.
of trying to put content out is like just it's too much. But anyway, so there was this guy that wrote this article, and I didn't love the article in the like I didn't it wasn't a bad article. I just like it wasn't very engaging, or it started with a neat premise, but then just didn't go deep on it. That's really what the problem was. But the premise was something like the difference between worship as a tool or versus worship as a thing, or like worship as like a prepackaged kind of an experience, sort of like the mega church experience, versus worship is something that takes real effort from you, and so you have to interact with it in some kind of a meaningful, tangible way. Obviously,
Mm.
there's liturgical worship, but even like my old fundamentalist background, where you have just like a piano and an organist, and they know the four chords, so everything we're doing has to be those, and we're going to sing the songs out of the hymnal, and my voice is going to crack because I have a cold today, and it's not going to be like this perfect curated experience. Like it's going to be, but it is something real. There's something real about that kind of singing together with people. That's not that when you go somewhere that has the budget for professional musicians,
Right.
a light show, a smoke machine, all this
Right.
different stuff. Like I hate to rag like it's like low hanging fruit, honestly, to
Yeah.
rag on megachurch worship or whatever. But
Yeah.
like there's a difference between those two experiences, right? And so I think there is something about what is happening as part of the Taylor Swift phenomenon, which I would characterize as being the apogee or like the the logical conclusion of the whole megachurch thing. And that's what I would sort of say is that the the there is a religious component that to the whole Swiftie phenomenon, which is what I'm interested in. I'm not really interested in the music. For one thing, I am not the target demographic. And if you can sometimes just acknowledge that you're not the target demographic for certain things and just let them pass you by, I just give this a better way to live your life. But I am interested in what moves people together in these spaces, which like I mean, if you look at that experience and then you look at what's going on in megachurch, the only difference is Taylor Swift was a much better production value, right? But really, I mean, like it is a kind of a worship experience, like, and it is a kind of a, you know, I'm not saying everybody there is committing idolatry or whatever. God knows everybody's heart, but my point is that there's something about it that has the optics of basically the optics of worship, right? And pretty much everybody, I would say like if Taylor Swift comes to Dallas or what, which I don't know if she's ever done, probably has at some point. You know, we have a lot of concert venues here. But if Taylor Swift ever comes to Dallas, the stadium wherever she's at will fill up. And there's a high likelihood that 80% of the people, maybe even 90% of the people who are there at that concert will also be at church on Sunday morning. And because the Bible Belt remains a very religious place, at least as far as almost everybody goes to church. And if you don't go to church, you don't look at people who go to church as there's some kind of like weird
Right.
relics of a past time or whatever like that. It's like, oh yeah, you know, I go to church maybe once a month or something like that, but everybody goes to church. And so there's a good chance that all those people will be in church. And it's interesting to think about. I mean, the most people who go to church in the DFW Metroplex go to one of three or four really large mega churches. Um, and so you know, some of which have like 100,000 people and multiple campuses all over the Metroplex and so on. And these are places, I mean, you drive past them and it's just a skyscraper, but it says, you know, Gateway Church on it or something like that. That's one of the large ones in the area, but I mean, there's several. So there is something about um, there is something about those two experiences which are very much the same. And so the thing that I'm sort of interested in is, you know, what's the chicken, what's the egg? You know, is this just another example of Christians trying to imitate the world badly? You know, the King of the Hill, you're not making Christianity better, you're just making rock and roll worse. Or is it the other way around? And part of me suspects actually that it is the other way around. And that just because of, I mean, Taylor Swift is my age. We're the same age. And uh one of us is a billionaire.
And
And
it's
the
not the
other
one I'm talking to.
and the other one of us talks to people on YouTube for fun. So you can, you know, I'm not trying to throw any shade at her as a person, you know, and I have no idea what her life is like. I know that I wouldn't want it, you know, and so but 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 there's uh but I have this strong sense, I have a strong feeling that what's going on in that phenomena right now is a sort of, you could say like weaponization or instrumentalization of the sort of the mega church worship experience that came into vogue, right, you know, in the years before Taylor Swift became big. And there is something about her phenomena which is very different. It's from other performers and other bands and things like that. So that's just kind of an intuition I have. It's something I've been thinking about a little bit lately. It seems like people keep talking about her more lately, which is weird because she's been big for so long. But I guess there's, I don't know. I guess it's like things are coming to a pitch, and so um yeah, that's basically what I would say is I think there is something about um I think there's something about what's going on there that is very religious, and I think it's a case of imitating, whether deliberately or otherwise. It's a case of imitating the facets of religion, you know, especially sort of the American megachurch religion, um, in a way that's very, you know, obviously much higher production values.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting because of course, when it comes to American American hymnody. I mean, you've got, I mean, it's this complex, you've got the African American tradition that's deeply, deeply involved in the rise of what we call pop music. And of course, Burn Power goes through
Yeah,
these
yeah,
kinds
yeah,
of
yeah.
things, as many other people do. So, hmm, I'll have to think about that.
Yeah.
I don't know that much about her,
Listen, we
but
just got to go to a concert. You get the tickets. We'll live tweet the whole thing. I mean, there is something about her that is like I mean like when the guy who wrote this insane article, which is so fun. Like when he's like maybe she's Lilith or something, from the Old Testament. There's something about her that has the sort of like the kind of a fairy quality, not
yeah,
like the fun fairies, like the sense of here's this thing that's, uh too beautiful to be real, and you get drawn into it, and you go into the fairy, you go into the hillside, you go into the barrow, and then you just don't remember anything. Like people coming out of our concerts literally having no memory of what happened in them. And this is a widely attested phenomena. I mean, that is something else. Like there's some kind of a, some kind of an experience happening there.
some kind of a witchcraft.
And the
Um,
thing is, like, I think rituals work, and you when you're bringing together that many people together into a context that's focused around one particular body,
yeah.
right? That is some kind of a ritual. And so then the question to ask is, what is it doing?
Yeah, and I think, she's, I had to look her up because, I put her in the sermon on Sunday. And
This man had to look up Taylor Swift. That's
I
amazing.
did.
By
I
the way,
had
just
to,
the fact that we said her name so many times is gonna be great for your channel. You're gonna get so many. The algo's gonna love this.
yeah, I don't know if it's quite the demographic. But it's, I mean, she's hitting 34. She's 34 now, and I think when she's in her 20s, people will look at it as one thing, but when she remains this queenly maiden sort of into her 30s, and of course she's dating Travis Kelce, so you've got the top tight end in the country. There, it's
If there's
just,
anything I know less about than Taylor Swift, by the way, it would be football.
boy, I don't know what kind of Texan you are.
Not a good one. I have to say, like, football really is the national religion down here, and it just really kind of bounced off of it personally. I really just I only follow combat sports. That's it. Like I watch the fights with you know pretty closely. I listen to all the fight podcasts after the fights, and I fight myself. Like and so that's my sport, and that's it. And I just don't have room for another one. So yeah,
Well,
when somebody's like the top tight end in the country, I'm like, okay, I vaguely, because I did play football in high school, so like I remember what a tight end is, but that is it. That's as far as my knowledge of Travis Kelce goes. Like I'm like, well, I don't know anything else about him, so there you go.
I've been pestering you for a while, and peppering you with questions, and I don't know if there's anything you want to pepper me about, but I'll give you your chance.
No, I mean, I don't know. Uh like anybody on the internet, you sort of make the mistake of thinking you know people because you listen to them talk a lot,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah, I don't know. Like, where do you see yourself in 5 years, Paul?
I
Like you're asking me all these tough questions about I just have to do this now because you're asking me all these tough questions about the symbolic world, and just like some of them are hard to answer because I genuinely don't know what is God doing, and
yeah.
I hope that I'm going to, do it well and all these other things. But like seriously though, you if you look at this little corner, right, there are definitely phases or stages that things have gone through, right? And the current I don't know, the current phase has been like a little hard for me to track. And it's hard to sort of even nail down why, but I think there's this sort of like the question, I mean, this is the question everybody at the summit was asking too, is something like, okay, but how do we embody this now? Like we talk all the time.
Yeah,
Like we talk too much. What are we gonna do now? Right?
yeah.
So how do you feel like things like the direction of this little corner, as much as there is a direction, to something
Yeah.
that's intentionally kind of loosely organized? But how do you feel that's going, and what do you see yourself doing in 5 years?
My, uh, I am, once people ask me this question, they have to realize that I am a very faithful disappointer. Because if you ask me what I'd like to be doing in 5 years, it's exactly what I'm doing now. I don't want to have 1 million subscribers. I don't want to travel 25 weeks a year. I don't want to, at some point, I want to do some writing, but that will probably have to wait until retirement
Mm,
because I do have a church.
yeah,
And even though it's a small church and they are extremely forgiving of me, there are responsibilities to it.
of course.
Um,
Well, if your answer is I want to do the same thing I'm doing now, then you're probably a happy man. So
I'm a very happy man.
thank God for that.
Yeah. And in terms of the corner, so I was talking to Jordan Hall about his game B experiences, and that whole game B thing just sort of makes me smile because I
Okay,
think,
explain to me
okay,
the terminology.
so Brett Weinstein, Jordan Hall, Jim Rutt, Eric Weinstein, a whole bunch of like really mega minds were watching what Steve Jobs did to the world in 2007 and said, that little slab that they put in everybody's hands, that that really rewrote our culture
Yeah,
fast.
yeah.
And of course, if you talk to Jordan Hall, he'll talk about, Vervaeke talks about the meaning crisis. Jordan Hall will talk about how he began to recognize the poly crisis, how a successful, he was a successful entrepreneur with Divx, which opened doors to access to a certain whole other level of society where
You
you had
said the
these,
poly crisis?
the poly crisis.
Okay.
So there's multiple crises. So once he reached a certain level in Silicon Valley through Divx, he began to be in rooms with the kinds of imagined masters of the universe who are watching all sorts of domains that we're not paying attention to. What is going on with the microorganisms in the soil? What is going on with the chemistry of the oceans? What is going
All the
on?
microplastics.
Exactly. And he's now traveling in different circles and he's talking to all of these little masters of their domain, and he is hearing all of these crises that are really rather frightening when you think about the fact that we are dependent on ranges of systems that we pay no attention to, that if crisis begins, you can have collapses in a whole variety of ways. Something like, a number of years ago, they're talking about how water is going to be more expensive than oil because certain places in the world don't have enough of it, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, some people know that I'm also a farmer, and this sort of thing comes up in agriculture all the
Yeah,
time, especially during COVID, where you had multiple kind of agricultural systems and basically that are all interdependent on each other, and the margin for error in these things, even things like how do we need refrigerated trucks to ship the meat to the stores in a certain amount of time, or the meat all spoils. And then you sort of like extrapolate, well, I've got this many animals and they're consuming this much feed a day, and if I need to slaughter them today to ship, but the truck's not here, then I've got to kill them anyway, and all that food goes to waste because they're eating food. And so like you have all of these systems, especially at the larger the scale becomes, you have these systems that are interdependent upon each other. And if they break down, if like one point in the system breaks down, then there's not a lot of resilience.
right.
Yeah.
So that's the poly crisis. And then he begins to recognize that with all of these crises, that then leads to a meta crisis, which is basically civilizational collapse, the ends of the Bronze Age, all of this stuff. And so you've got all these mega brains, they're increasingly aware of the interconnected nature of everything and how fragile everything is. And for example, if you talk to someone like Eric Weinstein, he lives with the continual awareness of an upcoming catastrophic collapse, which will mean Ragnarok. I mean, you won't have to have a very much of a conversation with Eric Weinstein to bump into that. So you've got all, and so these people, having realized how Steve Jobs basically saying, you don't need a stylus, you've got 5 of them on your hand. And if the whole world can be sort of disrupted, perhaps for ill, with that one little introduction, perhaps there is a good introduction that you could make to save the planet.
Oh, okay, I gotcha. Yeah.
So,
So have
so,
they
and
figured out what it is yet?
so we're really, so then that was game B.
Got it.
So we need a game B to solve the planet. And of course, Eric Weinstein wants things, we got to get off this rock. And Elon Musk is actually trying. But so then they all did all of this talking to figure out game B so that they could introduce the one catalyst analogous to the cell phone that could, of course, turn human history back around in a good direction. And when I listen to that, part of me just thinks, with all of the brain power in the room, did any of you ever just for a moment consider that if you actually had to write down what that positive vision of humanity would look like, that this somehow would be non-controversial? I mean, didn't, I mean, come on, people. Have you paid no attention to any of history where and Chesterton made the observation that almost all of the people wanting to do good in the world really major in recognizing evil, and to actually
Right.
articulate a vision of the good is enormously difficult. So
Saint. So we have a recent saint, Saint Porphyrios, who is an Athonite elder, and he's said what in what one of his teachings, he said nobody becomes holy by fighting evil. And what he means by that, he doesn't mean by that you shouldn't fight evil, but that fighting evil, focusing on evil, is actually not the thing that makes you a holy person. And it doesn't make you capable of actually recognizing the good. And yeah, and this is, I mean, the thing is, like the idea that this vision of what humanity should be would be non-controversial. I mean, this is exactly the problem, and it's always the problem with progressivism, like of any kind. And there's like right-wing progressives and left-wing progressives, and this idea that, okay, the next thing, guys, the next election, the next widget, the next idea, the next economic solution or whatever, like this is going to be the thing that is going to really solve our problem, and this is going to get us finally across the finish line. But nobody really has a clear idea of what the finish line is, or if they do, there's no kind of a consensus about it. And a lot of times it sure looks weirdly like genocide, I have noticed.
that's
So
right. The final solution as a phrase
whoops,
that's been
whoops,
used before.
whoops. Yeah, it's not good.
So anyway, so you have this little community that Jordan Hall was participating in game B.
Yeah.
And and okay, well, we got all these smart brains and we're going to solve this thing. And of course, not that they couldn't get anywhere. Surprise. And so then they decided, Jim Rutt talks about this, they decided to go into spore mode, where, well, obviously us sitting together acting like masters of the universe,
So
maybe.
I don't actually know anything at all about Jordan Hall, but is he a tech bro?
Wow.
Because this kind of language is how tech bros talk.
No,
Like,
yeah, he is a tech bro.
okay,
And so if you watch Rebel Wisdom in its early days,
okay,
he was Jamie Wheel, Jordan Hall, John Vervaeke. He was part of
okay,
these
yeah,
lights in this area.
okay, yeah.
And he's recently become a Christian.
No, okay, so I knew that's the only thing I know about him. I'm
Okay.
like, who is this Jordan Hall guy? Should I have heard of him? He's become a Christian. Again, it's just like when I'm really out of touch, like with whatever is happening.
And he was
I'm
at the Symbolic World Summit.
I know this. And I was
Oh,
like, oh, somebody was like, this is Jordan Hall. I'm like, oh, it's very nice to meet you, Jordan. It's like that was it. So and somebody tells me they become a Christian, I'm just like happy for them, and I don't really, I'm like, great, me too. Still becoming one. Let's, it's wonderful. but I don't know. But I just like I'm not super plugged into a lot of the
Yeah.
conversations people are having. So like I said, okay, so game B.
So game B was they were going to figure this out. Then they went into spore mode, which basically meant that they couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And they were all going to go out into the world and just sort of, and I think that's kind of what's been happening in the corner right now,
Got it.
is that
It's
it's,
we're all in spore mode.
well, yeah, people. So about a year ago, there's this new wave that's, or 2 years ago, Discord was kind of done, and then we were using StreamYard to live streams and have these conversations now on the internet instead of just in the Discord server.
It
And
is
then,
funny how like there's always like with each iteration of an online community, the medium is also somehow the message. Like we move
yeah,
from one
yeah,
little piece of technology to
yep.
another. That's so interesting to me.
So then in the last year or so, or a little less than a year, the spore mode has been a whole bunch of people just started their own channels, and they
Uh-huh.
started having conversations with each other, and they started maybe piecing together their own little videos.
Uh-huh.
And so instead of everybody watching me all the time, or everybody sort of transitioned from consuming to doing some, or a bunch of people started transitioning into making, which I really like, because
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's a much better thing than just consuming. So, and I, again, the whole time ever since I started on YouTube, people would be like waiting for a big reveal that I was going to somehow release the new product that was going, or the new organization. And the whole time, I mean, I was forced into sort of announcing Estuary, and I'm really happy the way Estuary has gone. But Estuary is also a very non thing, in
Mm.
that now at my church, we now do Estuary on Sunday mornings at 9 o'clock, which has been absolutely delightful, because what we've got some non-Christian people coming in, we've got some church people, and we just kind of have a conversation for about
I
an
mean,
hour and a
this
half.
is this is a kind of a thing where we think about, you know, if we are going to do another Symbolic World Summit, where would we do it? What would it look like? And there's a part of the summit to me that felt like it was too much of a thing. And I mean, it was still a great experience. I'm glad I wasn't involved in any of the planning. I came in very late in the day and everything, but there's like sort of a question of like how much production is too much production,
Yeah.
you know I don't know. And I mean, that's a serious question. If you want to tell me the answer, I'd appreciate it. Because
Well,
I don't know what you want to put on something nice for people that's going to be worth their time and their money to come out and be a good experience. But then on the flip side, you don't want to do something that's like super self-aggrandizing. So,
what has developed, and this has started before, but what has developed has been, we have these estuaries that happen sort of all over the English language world. And then every now and then someone says, I want to do a little bigger thing. So we're having, we're calling, they didn't name it this, but we're calling it the Northwestuary, which is happening in Olympia, Washington.
nice, nice. I like it.
And
Olympia.
Olympia. Yeah,
I'm gonna
because,
be in I'm gonna be in Leavenworth next week.
oh,
Yeah.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
So and it's kind of funny, because I'm Christian Reformed, when people look around for a venue, they're like, is there a Christian Reformed church there? So actually, an old college and seminary buddy of mine pastors the church in Olympia. So they said, Paul Vandersklay's done this thing. Could we have an event in your building? It's like,
Nice.
yeah. So gonna have another one in Chicago. And we're still sort of working out my venues. My space here at Living Stones is kind of small, because
Hmm.
economics are a factor, which you very
Sure.
quickly figure out when you do an event. It's like, where's the pricing at? And we've got expenses to pay for people. And I mean, there's a lot of practicalities, but most of our events, we want to, you sort of need to have some celebrity speaker
Yep, of
thing
course.
to draw people. But for the most part, we've wanted it to be a kind of thing where, if you go to this event, you will be seen and heard in this
Yeah.
event. You will not be audience.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You all, when you come together, you will create the event together. And the estuary protocol is really good at that, because obviously not everybody's comfortable speaking. Some people are too comfortable speaking,
Oh,
and
oh
and
man.
figuring out how to do that is not easy. So if, I early on I said I'd rather start AA than Apple,
Oh,
in
nice.
that I don't want,
Yeah.
people, I don't necessarily want a thing. I would rather give people something so that there can be lots of little things. And that's
Yeah.
so, my channel hasn't grown tremendously, dramatically. It's still small and weird, and I still do things on my channel that I know sort of destroys success. I won't mention the name because some people would be offended, but certain elements of my channel are absolutely unwatchable. And I'm sure the YouTube algorithm sees that and says, hardly anybody watches that. This channel is suspect. And so I would much rather, in the end of the day, when I look at the TLC and I see that people are creating durable friendships in it, and some people, we don't have a lot of women, so we haven't had a lot of marriages, but people are creating durable friendships. And even with the little estuary happening at church, I see church members getting to know people that they would never have a chance to know.
Yeah.
And they're from a different generation. They've had a very different background. Many church people, especially many church people, sort of grow up in that community, and then within a generation or two, they might not have any substantive relationships with people outside the church. And so now I'm just watching these people become friends. And to me, I look at that and I say, that's what I want to see. That's what I want to see. So I'm a very happy man.
How Dutch are you?
I have one of those little DNA tests that I haven't taken yet, because my wife is like, don't do that.
They already
No,
have all of your
that's
information.
what I figure. So, it's fun. It was fun listening to you talk this about your family tree, because my father died in 2013. 2 years before my father died, his cousin's son was friends with a genealogist, and they did a genealogy on my father's tree. My mother's tree were basically subsistence farmers in Friesland, which is the
Oh, I know where
Frisians.
I know where that is.
Okay, so that's my mother's side. My father's side, he did some digging and discovered that these were Jews. And it was super interesting, because this name Vanderklay, it used to be Vanderklay, Klei.
Hmm.
It seems like when the Jews in the Netherlands, everybody in the Netherlands needed to have a last name. So they picked, we're from the clay, very biblical. What
Yeah,
are
of
you? We're
course.
from the clay.
Van der Play. Yeah.
Van der clay, of the
I like it.
clay.
Yeah.
And so we did some genealogy back. And so we were able to get back beyond the Van der Clay and find the patronymic names that went back and forth between the generations. Um, Hyman and Hartog and Seckel, and and then of course we hit the last names at some point, and then we hit my great great grandfather, who was something of a character, and he did something that got himself, I think, kicked out of the Jewish community. And so he had his oldest son, I believe, was disabled, because he lived with family members all his life. He never
Hmm.
married. I can look on old census forms and see something like laborer.
Hmm.
So he was someone, I think, was probably mentally disabled in some way. And so people with mental disabilities were just laborers, they're part of a family, part of a community. But so then his second son, who's my great grandfather, he sent him to Western Michigan, where all the Dutchmen were settling. And once he got a little bit established, then if you were established, then people didn't have to go through Ellis Island. So my great grandfather had to go through Ellis Island, and then the rest of the family came over, and then they settled in Spring Lake, Michigan. And I even found the obituary of my great great grandfather, and even by the obituary, you can tell he was kind of a old guy that walked around talking to people in the town. Seemed fairly well known in the town because he was known as the Old Dutchman, even though he was a Jew.
Hmm.
And so I think at some point in Spring Lake, the courthouse burnt down, which gave the family an opportunity to rename everybody with more anglicized names, a little less
Hmm.
Jewish. And so the whole Jewish thing just sort of went away. But there were always hints of it because my father was born in 35, and so he was a boy during the Second World War. And my grandfather said to him once, he said, if we'd still been in the Netherlands, we probably would have been in some trouble. What does that mean? Then we discovered this Jewish past to
Hmm.
us. And then, of course, some people, because I told some people we have a fairly nice Jewish contingent in the corner, so they did some more research. And this genealogist, part of his shtick was to find the closest, most famous relative. And it turns out that my closest, most famous relative among the Jews are not these great Nobel laureates, but rather the Marx brothers. They
Oh,
are my family.
well, I mean, I've heard of them though, so that's not so bad. Yeah.
So they're
So
actually not too far from the Marx brothers.
how much is I saw you posting a few things about people coming into this CRC with burnt wooden shoes. Something to this effect, right? So like what's the component there in the CRC between people who are, let's say, like ethnically Dutch and therefore Reformed, in the same way that we might have somebody who's a Serb and therefore Orthodox, which does not mean that their faith is not genuine or anything else, but like what's the spread?
So at this last synod, a colleague of mine from just down the valley
I
from
got
my
the sense there was some kind of like a coup or something maybe happened.
yes, there's been
So it was
there's
happening right at the same time as the Southern Baptist Convention voting not to affirm the Nicene Creed, and so I was a little distracted. I was a little distracted.
yeah.
We had
So
a Yeah,
my friend
we
Patrick
should have talked
Anthony,
about that.
who so a generation ago, so well, you triggered a whole you talk about stories. So like many immigrant European immigrant communities, the Dutch in America stayed in their own little silos, and they were quite good at it. They
Yeah,
established their own Christian schools. They established their own institutions.
right.
The Dutch are very energetic and very successful. But
And thrifty, so I hear.
yes, very thrifty.
Yeah.
And so the Second World War, of course, drafted all of these young Dutch men and put them in the service, and then they go. And in World War II, they begin to discover Lutherans, and they discover that wow, they're part of this much broader Christian community.
Hmm.
And so these people then go back to their little Dutch enclaves, and after the Second World War, the Christian Reformed Church fans out throughout the country. Then by the 1970s, so my father he is he is called to pastor a church in Paterson, New Jersey, to turn like a little rescue mission. That the Dutchmen used to live in Paterson, and they moved out to the suburbs after the war.
Hmm.
And when they left those houses, migrants from the South, African Americans, usually from the Carolinas, sort of moved in. And the soft-hearted Dutchmen, there's just a few of them, they looked at that and thought, these poor people. And so then they started these little missions in the city, and they called them chapels. And then that went on for about 10 or 20 years. And at some point, the Dutchmen are also like, that should probably become a church and not just dependent on us forever. So they called my father, fresh out of seminary, who probably didn't know a single black person in his whole life except for Pullman um, Porters. Yeah. So to pastor this church in Paterson. And of course, that begins at the beginning of the 60s. But as the 60s go on, you have the civil rights movement. And so um, what happens in the Christian Reformed Church is that there's a real sense of participation in, well, how racist are we? Because we feel awfully white as this Dutch church. And so then in the 70s, and of course, my father's church was mostly African American where I grew up, plus some well meaning Dutch people sprinkled into it.
Mm-hmm.
You have this whole, to be Christian Reformed, how does it mean to be Christian Reformed? Does that mean to be Dutch? Because our ethnic heritage was so strong. And so in 1980, Andrew Kuyvenhoven, himself a Dutch immigrant, wrote a banner article that said, "It's time to burn the wooden shoes. It's time for us to become American."
Nice.
But this was part of the, let's say, the left wing, the progressives in the Christian Reformed Church, that we were going to participate in the civil rights movement. We're going to participate in the culture as a whole. We're going to do all of this. So that, of course, the conservatives in the Christian Reformed Church are like, what do you mean? This is our Dutch heritage, and so they had a banner. So it was a weekly magazine in the Christian Reformed Church. They had 2 wooden shoes that were ablaze on the cover. And it just was like, the Christian Reformed Church lost their mind. How could Andrew Kuyvenhoven say it's time to burn the wooden shoes? Fast forward 45 years.
I've been trying to
Now,
get the dike is leaking joke in here somewhere, but I haven't been able to figure out where to. It's the only things I know about Dutch culture are dikes and wooden shoes.
so the Dutch are actually very ethnically savvy.
Mm.
They're very savvy, but of
Good at
course,
marketing themselves.
yes.
Yeah.
But the conservatives, obviously, in a culture, the conservatives will want to conserve, and so the Ole Bolin and the Svart Piet. You know who Svart Piet is?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so I was in Christian school in the 70s, and they were doing a Sinterklaas with Svart Piet in the late 70s,
Uh-huh.
and it's like, holy crap. This is, I mean, so anyway, so the progressives have basically captured the main institutions of the Christian Reformed Church, the crown jewels, Calvin College, Calvin University, the denominational structure. They've all tend to be CRC progressives, which have tended to be
just what Calvin would have wanted, right? Is all the stuff named after him.
yes. So these are the people that have been pushing, diversity, equity, and inclusion. But what happened was that many of the children of the Christian Reformed left have been sort of following along with the main line and deconstructing and leaving churches. So
Mm-hmm.
churches all over the country are, they're getting older, there are empty seats in the pews. All of this happens while the Young, Restless, and Reformed movement happens. And at least a portion of those Young, Restless, and Reformed people begin to look at the Christian Reformed Church, which is a confessionally conservative congregation church, and say, we would fit in here.
Mm-hmm.
And the Dutch also have this cultural aspect of tolerance. So in the Netherlands, ostensibly, a lot of drug use is illegal, but they also have this culture of looking the other way. And so,
well, I mean, it's the very first place that like secularism as like defined as like religion is optional. It's the very first place that happened in Europe. Yeah.
yeah, except Sam Tiedemann says it happened in Poland first, and then they fled to the Netherlands.
Oh, really?
Yes, it was. He says it was actually the Unitarians, which makes a lot of sense.
Oh, well, that's for sure. Yeah, that's right.
So anyway, so what's been happening over the Christian Reformed Church is that a lot of people on the progressive end of the denomination have been deconstructing and leaving the faith, and their places have been filled partially by people coming into the Christian Reformed Church for its confessionalism.
Hmm.
And so the Christian Reformed Church is actually beginning gradually more and more conservative. And then COVID really accelerated that because, of course, the progressives are like wearing masks and keeping their churches closed and being obedient to the status quo. And the conservatives are like, screw them, we're going to keep having church. After COVID, a lot of those progressive churches have basically withered and sort of gone away. The conservative churches have bloomed. So then we have the fight over same-sex marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And the conservatives basically say, no, we're not going to do it. In fact, we're going to say this is confessional, which means that now suddenly 20% of the church is out of subscription. And so over the last two synods, the conservatives have been tightening this thing up. And at this synod, Patrick Anthony, my colleague, stands up and says, so then there's this gravamen that you can kind of take as an exception. So Alvin Plantinga, one of the most famous members of the Christian Reformed Church.
What in God's green earth is a gravamen?
That's Latin.
I know, but what does it mean in your context?
It meant that if you had a confessional difficulty, if you're joining the Christian Reformed Church, but you say, that infant baptism thing I don't know about, you could go to the council and say, the council says, we'd like you to be an office bearer because you're a good Reformed person. And you say, yeah, but I'm not sure about infant baptism. And so basically at the local council, the council could say, okay, you don't believe in infant baptism. You can still sign the form of subscription. You basically sort of take an exception to infant baptism, just don't teach against it in the church.
Okay.
So then you could be a member of the, you could be an office bearer in the Christian Reformed Church within subscription.
Yeah, because that's also like a technical legal term, and it means something very different in that context. And so every time I hear you say it, I'm like, what is he saying? So okay, all right.
It's analogous to a Presbyterian exception, but it was never an exception in ours. So anyway,
I mean, we have a fun example of this locally, actually. It's a sort of a quiet secret that there's a you're aware of Dallas Theological Seminary, probably, yes. Right? So there's a quiet pipeline from that to my parish.
Oh.
Yeah. And so then you get these people in this position where in their final years at DTS, they convert to Orthodoxy, and then suddenly, like, as part of graduation, you have to sign this paper that says, I confess all these things that that DTS believes as part, like, conditional for graduation. So then it's like, well, how do you sign that? Like, how do you get your degree? And so
you sign this at the end?
Yeah, well, you have to do it at the beginning, but then at the end they make you sign like a confession to make sure that you're in line with what DTS teaches as part of your graduation. I know several people who've gone through this, and they were able to actually just say, listen, I've become Orthodox. Here's the Nicene Creed. It's a historical, and they never had any problem. They just said, okay, well, you can sign the Nicene Creed, and it was good. But it's like a quiet exception. In fact, I probably shouldn't have said anything about it on the internet because I don't want to get anybody into trouble. But there's a quiet pipeline from DTS to the Orthodox Church in America.
Oh my.
Talk about strangely unexpected things.
Well, that's good, because I hear that the Orthodox Church, along with everyone else, has a crisis of finding enough clergy. So
it's a huge problem, actually. Yeah, it's it's a great problem in the sense that it's a growth problem, but it's a problem. Yeah.
So anyway, Alvin Plantinga, and these are usually quiet. They're usually, they're usually private because the council doesn't have to disclose it. And so apparently Alvin Plantinga at one point made comment that he basically took a gravamen on double predestination.
Got it. Oh.
Yeah. And Alvin Plantinga, probably the
big one.
Yeah. So
I had to publicly renounce that,
Oh.
Yeah. Part of my public renunciations when I became an Orthodox Christian.
Wow.
Yeah,
you got that. We should play that on YouTube sometime.
I don't know if there's a recording or not. It was wild though.
So anyway,
I will say, I would just say, like as part of conversion, like a renouncing of prior heresies and everything is a part of that normally, but usually it's just sort of like a blanket thing. But the version they gave me, and I've never seen them do this to anybody else. The version, and maybe it's because I was a pastor before, but the version they gave me was like point by point, like every major Reformed doctrine, So,
really?
Yep. Publicly renounced all of those things. It was pretty fun. It also felt like really final in a certain way. I was like, I'm in for a penny, in for a pound now,
Burn those bridges. You're not going to slide back into the Reformed Baptist group.
Yep.
So anyway, Patrick, my friend Patrick, stands up at this last synod and says, somebody had made the speech that, the tightening down on this gravamen, because basically the Senate said you get like 3 years. If you have a difficulty, resolve your difficulty in 3 years or out you go. And so since someone stood up and said, Alvin Plantinga, because everyone in the room is supposed to just be hushed at the name of Alvin Plantinga, because he's is the Plantingas are like the royals of the Christian Reformed Church.
Right, of
Alvin,
course,
Neil,
obviously, as everybody knows.
yeah,
The
and
Taylor Swifts of the Christian
they
Reformed Church,
are.
if
And
you will.
then Patrick Anthony stands up and says, I'm more CRC than Alvin Plantinga. And it was like, oh. And right then I knew the denomination has turned a page.
Wow.
And because I'm mostly networked into all of the progressives, and because these have always been my people. And it was just like, I mean, if this had been a local thing, Patrick Anthony might have been in danger of his life after, because that was just but when you get to this question about universal history, I mean,
Yeah.
Patrick Anthony basically is saying confessionally,
Yeah.
it is not by Dutch descent that makes me
Right.
Christian Reformed. It's by confession.
Right.
And it was just like, I don't know if, because Patrick came into the denomination here in Central California,
Mhm.
and he doesn't know the denomination, but when he said that, it's like, and that's where the Christian Reformed Church is at right now.
That's so interesting. Well, listen, I don't mean this the wrong way at all, but like it's not very often you hear of places becoming more conservative. So
Yeah.
God bless you all. Like I hope that yeah, I hope it all goes well. Like I mean it's interesting to watch. My old denomination is way too small to have anything interesting happening in the news, but it was interesting to watch the SBC, which obviously like you growing up we just tell people who are Southern Baptists usually because it's too much work to explain what the BMA is and like all this stuff. But um the the just like watching the SBC grapple with its own identity and trying to answer the question of what does it mean to be a Baptist in the larger view of Christian history, which is actually not a Baptist question, you know? And so like the term now like the terms of the discussion, of course, they eventually they voted not to affirm the Nicene Creed, although they did affirm the American Pledge of Allegiance. So there are creeds and then there are creeds, I suppose. But there's yeah, yep. And that's a thing that happened. You can go look at it. But we should have started with that actually. But it was one of these things where, being a Baptist originally meant making this huge break. Like back in the 17th century, that's what it meant, making this huge break with everything that's come before you, intentionally so. And then, in the late 19th century, in reaction to like the Stone Campbell movement, the Baptists start, Baptist secessionism and what landmarkism and all this stuff basically becomes a way to create a narrative, ultimately a failed narrative, but to create a narrative of basically a Baptist version of apostolic succession, which is, for people who don't know, this is the belief which I grew up with, that the first church in Jerusalem, AD 30, was Baptist both in doctrine and in polity. Did you not know that people believe
No,
this? Your face
no.
just then was amazing. Oh my gosh, there is this amazing tract called The Trail of Blood. You can just like look it up online. See this, I could actually share my screen for. Hold on. This is, man, if you don't know about The Trail of Blood, boy, do I have, this is gonna be a great day for you. I can't believe I assume everybody knows this because in the South it's pretty common to bump into people who believe this. Like it's a pretty normal thing. Even like even if you're not Baptist, like you'll have heard that Baptists believe this, right? All right, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Take a look. All right, so this is just this great document called The Trail of Blood, Following the Christians Down Through the Centuries, or the History of Baptist Churches from the time of Christ, their founder, to the present day. So this was written by J.M. Carroll. This particular copy was published in 1931, but it's like a late 19th century kind of a thing. And so this comes out of landmarkism, this whole introduction here written. So this is the assertion, right, that the marks of the New Testament church are that head and founder is Christ, so no popes. He's a lawgiver. He's the only executive. Its only rule of faith and practice is the Bible. Its name is church or churches. And so when they say the New Testament church, I should explain that traditionally Baptists do not believe in the idea of a universal church. There's only local churches. There's only ever a local assembly. There's no the church, capital V. It's only ever just a local, these like independent, free associating local bodies, right? This is very Lockean. Its polity is congregational. All members are equal. So there's no hierarchy, there's no episcopacy. Not only is there not, but there never has been. This is what they would argue. Its members are only saved people, not baptizing any babies. Thank you very much. And no sacraments, just two
Babies aren't
ordinances.
saved.
Babies aren't saved. That's right. Believers' baptism followed by the Lord's Supper. Pastors and deacons, those are your only officers. And then it goes on. Its work is getting folks saved, right? Which is the most Southern Baptist way to express this. By the way, the Southern Baptist Convention itself doesn't subscribe to this, but a lot of Southern Baptists do because it was commonly accepted among Baptists until at least the 80s or 90s. But like I said, I grew up still being taught this. There's also it had a financial plan, obviously, like weapons of warfare, spiritual, not carnal, and independent separation of church and state, which is actually a fundamental Baptist idea. Although it's hard to convince evangelicals of that now, maybe, but historically that's been the case because very often they were, yeah.
Right.
So anyway, we have the Trail of Blood. So it's divided up into these lectures, and we got the first lecture where it describes Christianity. And again, it's the argument that the first church was Baptist not only in its faith but also in its polity. And so he's got descriptions of this. And then we get to the chart, and this is the thing that it's famous for. Oh, where's the chart? Does this not have the image? Dang it. It doesn't, but I'm sure your people are in here somewhere as not real Christians because he mentions pretty much every group, including the Orthodox. Let's do like Trail of Blood. Let's image search this bad boy. Okay, so okay, yeah, here's the actual image. We can see if we okay, that's a bad image. Hold on. Hold on. Gotta be here we go. Here's the that's also a bad image. Yeah, here's the chart. There we go. Okay. So this it's called the Trail of Blood because the red dots are places Baptists were killed by the Catholics.
Uh-huh.
So if you take a look at this, they'll say, well, it started out with just Christians. And then the church government was changed, and Constantine created the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, saint and image worship, invented in 787. No images before then.
Wow.
And
It seems kind of
and
late.
right, I know. And division in 869 between the Greek and Catholics and the Roman Catholics. Also, I mean, a lot of this is just wrong. But if you notice, along the bottom line here, they trace the progression of the Baptist Church through the Montanists, the Novatianists, the Cathari,
Wow.
the Donatists, the Arnoldists, the Albigensians, the Henricans. These are all extremely heretical groups, right? Like, I mean, for instance, like he talks about the Donatists in here. The Donatists are like more Catholic than the Catholics. Like
Right.
St. Augustine like writes half of the things that he ever wrote in his life against Donatism, against the idea that a bishop or a priest couldn't celebrate valid sacraments if he was himself a sinful person, right? So like they're more Catholic than the Catholics. And basically they basically just take any heterodox group and they say, no, those people are actually Baptists. The Catholics have just covered over the truth. Right, those people were actually Baptists. So this is what a significant number of Baptists kind of grew up being taught and believing. And it is
Wow.
some kind of an attempt at universal history. It's a failure because it turns out not to be enough to confer identity on you and sort of allow you to like be a Baptist and inhabit history. Right. And it's like a very actually sort of like a very dialectic, it's always been us versus them kind of
Yeah.
view of history. And here you are up here somewhere. There's
Yeah.
Calvin
Yeah.
and all that stuff. But so
Wow.
yeah, so this is the thing that I grew up with. And it's one of the things that sort of actually sparked my interest in history even as a very young man, because I remember thinking at the time, I was like, well, there's no way that can be true. And
Wow.
to the point that I was sometimes told that so landmarkists, and this is there's Baptist secessionism, which is related to landmarkism. They're not quite the same thing, but they're close enough for our purposes. So landmarkists would hold actually that there that other Baptists could be saved, but only the landmarkist Baptists are actually the bride of Christ in the New Testament. And so I was actually told this by somebody who applied it to my old denomination, the BMAA. And as a little child, I just repeated it as like, oh, well, the Bride of Christ in Revelation at the BMAA. And my grandfather, who is big stuff in the BMAA, and and is a wonderful man who I really admire. He said to me, "Why do you think that? Like, where's that in the Bible?" And I was just remember being like, "Oh, okay, I guess I heard it, but I was just repeating something another adult in my denomination had said." So
Sure.
there was this kind of idea, especially in the late 19th, early 20th century, that only landmarkists are actually the bride of Christ. So anyway, this is one of the layers when you're peeling back the onion. This is one of the layers of why I'm so interested in history. And Baptists themselves are like the SBC is clearly struggling with this question right now of how are they, in addition to all the other things they're struggling with, women's orders and uh a massive still I think largely uncovered sexual abuse scandals in their denomination, but there's also just this question of like how do they fit into the larger story of being a Christian. And because the answer for a long time for Baptists has been, well, we don't, because we're the real Christians and all these other people aren't. And but there are, basically there's a more reformed wing of the SBC, who the people who are currently in control of at least a couple of the seminaries, for instance, who are trying to sort of situate and say, no, you can still like the creeds and be a Baptist. But traditionally, that's not been true, right? Like Baptists reject creeds, and especially any, creeds that Constantine was involved with, sort of out of hand.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
now this thing sort of came up. And so what they did was they basically tabled it to a committee, which is how you kill things if you're a
Yeah.
Baptist. We don't, people sometimes say we shoot our wounded. No, that's not true. We just table them to a committee. But um and so they basically tabled that to a committee. But then one of the next motions on the floor, this happened the same week of the anniversary of the Nicene Council, the first Nicene Council, by the way. So there was like one of these bizarre symbolism happens moments. And then one of the next motions on the floor was to affirm the use of the Pledge of Allegiance at Southern Baptist Convention events. And that passed with, flying colors, pun intended. And so that was one of those weird moments looking at, I've got lots of family members that are part of the SBC and everything. And so I'm looking at this and the way that it's happening, the way that things are unfolding. And sort of like there's at least a tacit rejection, like an attempt to say maybe we fit in with a larger story of what it means to be a Christian, and then a rejection of that,
Yeah.
but then followed immediately by saying, but to be a Southern Baptist means you pledge allegiance to the flag of this country. And that's another kind of attempt at universal history, which
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can't see into the future, but I sort of suspect probably won't go well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Wow.
it was a
I'd
wild
heard there
week,
were
man.
rumblings about the Nicene Creed, and
Oh,
I
dude.
thought, what?
It was a wild week for me. I will just tell you. I was like more excited than I've been about anything in a long time. I was just like staying up late into the night on Twitter, following all of these random SBC pundits, which is, like whole industry, and just like different people talking about like, oh, I love the creeds of the first, however many ecumenical councils you decide you like. But I don't think we should add this to the SBC Baptist Faith and Message, and here's why. And just like a lot of interesting pieces like that, and the arguments for it and against it. And it was very interesting. Like, it was weird, but it was also kind of like this weird deja vu of, it's been so long since I've kind of been operating that world, and so like watching the proceedings, even watching some of the stuff you post, and like I'm getting like Vietnam flashbacks to business meetings, and I'm just like, oh no, oh no, I'm so glad I don't have to do that anymore. But just the it was just a wild week for me. I mean, I was just like, and there was the same week that the Roman Catholic Church came out, the Vatican issued that study document that said, actually, we think the East was right about the papacy all along. And I was like, what is happening? Did you not see this?
No.
dude.
I'm in the middle of wedding season, man. I haven't been able
Oh,
to.
dude,
I'm just trying
this
to
is
keep my head
great.
above water.
Literally the same week, they they issued this document. So like if you don't know, like Kale, if you follow him,
Yeah.
he talks about the way that like the studying Vatican documents is like its own little sort of industry. Like there are whole people who their only job is to read and parse documents the Vatican puts out. Which is, I mean, which is amazing. What's this one called? Is it the Seat of Peter? Uh, Hold on. I'm gonna find
We are living in the end times.
what is happening, right? Okay, so it's called the Bishop of Rome, Primacy and Synodality, and of course Synodality, and it
Oh
is of
yeah.
course written not in English, but they translated it. But there's a bunch of, I mean, I'll give you some highlights. One of the things that they say is they should not insist upon an understanding of papal supremacy or papal primacy, which those are two different things for people who don't know, greater than what existed in the first millennium. In other words, basically, and they talk about East should not be made to accept a version greater than what exists in the first millennium. Maybe Vatican, they're talking basically in a lot of jargon around it, but basically the idea that um maybe actually Vatican I was wrong about papal infallibility, or at least we don't have to interpret it the way they interpreted it, which is how you quietly say something was wrong. It's like, well, now, given the context of the time, yada yada, right? Um, uh, oh, on this rock I will build my church, saying actually the majority of the church fathers did not interpret that as being about the Pope specifically, so we shouldn't insist on that anymore. So it's a study document. I'm not saying it's got the weight of dogma or
Yeah.
whatever, but
Yeah.
I mean, but it does come from the Vatican and is basically saying, no, we think the East was maybe right about the papacy the whole time. So it was just like it was a crazy week for me. I was just
Wow.
and so that basically distracted me from even caring about any CRC stuff going on because I was just like, what is happening?
You certainly would be forgiven to not pay attention to the CRC because you're looking at the Southern Baptist and the Roman Catholic Church. I
Yeah,
mean,
well,
the
yeah.
CRC is,
Yeah. Well, also being part of obviously the Orthodox Church is a large body worldwide, but here in the U.S. a very small minority.
yeah,
And I do sort of like sympathize in a lot of ways with what's happening in the CRC right now and stuff like that. There's some interesting parallels, but it's also, I mean, this is another part of people trying to come to terms with history, which is the thing that I'm the most
yeah,
interested in,
yeah,
right? People trying to come to terms with history and for the longest time, it's been, the Orthodox Church has basically been on the receiving end of that. And then usually like, hasn't been a pleasant experience. And so like to just like see a document come out from the Vatican where like maybe the East has been right about the papacy all along. I'm like, what? What?
wow.
What? And then at the same time, the Baptists are saying, I'm sorry, but maybe the Orthodox were right about the creed all along, and again, like, what? And of course, like that thing failed, and probably nothing will come of this other thing either, and whatever.
Yeah,
But it's just one of those weird moments where people are trying to even one of the oldest Christian bodies in the entire world, certainly the largest and the most powerful and the most important, like in any kind of by any kind of like a measurable whatever. Um, for them to be trying to come to terms actually with their own history and the schism in the church and everything what is it's just very interesting. And of course, you don't want any of this stuff to like move towards a kind of like a phony union or anything like that. And
yeah,
things like that have happened in the past. And the Orthodox are, especially the lay people, are tend to be really, really historically skeptical of things like that, and probably will continue to be so, I think. And that's good. Like it's you don't want a fake union or something like that. But anyway, it was a crazy week. It was a crazy week as somebody who's I'm interested in these things both as a Christian myself and as somebody who's got to Father Alexander Schmemann, who is a major Orthodox writer from the end of the last century. um, he said something to the effect once of the becoming Orthodox. Of course, he grew up in it, but he was talking about the convert experience. Um, One of the things that you have to do is to come to terms with the long and painful path of history. That's how he
Hmm.
phrased it. And And so that's one of those things. And actually, I when I see something like the Trail of Blood, what I see in that is actually a failure to do that, right? Like because actually intuitively there's something in you that knows there shouldn't be this total break. There shouldn't be this total break in continuity, right? And so actually when the the Stone Cowell movement came along and said that there was a total break and the Holy Spirit just returned and he's back now and he's me, you know. I'm not saying that's what Campbell actually said, but it was that's the implication, right? It's like
Yeah,
the Holy Spirit hasn't been talking to anybody since the last apostle
yeah,
died, but he's talking to me now, and we're gonna fix everything, and which is the sort of the defining feature of American religion. I mean, the every religion that has started on this soil, including could argue like certain strains of Pentecostalism, not to throw any shade at your future aspirations there, but every religion that started on this soil, I mean, Mormonism being the best example of like, a solidly American religion, um, it has been always starts with a premise of the Holy Spirit has been gone, but now he's back and he's talking to me.
yeah,
And if you want the Holy Spirit, then you've got to get on board with my program.
yeah,
Right. And so, but we all sort of know intuitively, I think, in our hearts that the rupture shouldn't be there. And so the Trail of Blood this attempt to sort of have their cake and eat it too, and to actually say actually there was no rupture. You've just been but all the history books are written by the Pope, and so there's all this propaganda, but actually all these groups historically, many of which were really out there in terms of what they taught and believed, they were all actually Baptist the whole time. So yeah, so I mean, if you want to like psychoanalyze me, that's how I got interested in universal history, is because I grew up in the middle of this attempt to create one, but it just wasn't true.
yeah.
So,
And well, nor well, I guess it's been compelling for a lot of people, but it
well, I
seems
mean,
it seems a
I, I
stretch.
I won't consider something compelling for a lot of people unless it lasts like 500
Well,
years.
that's a good point.
Like, I don't agree with Calvinism, but obviously it's been compelling for a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
One could even say they couldn't help it. But but it was something like that. I mean, it was kind of a flash in the pan that lasted a little less than 100 years.
Yeah.
And now, except for, certain corners of the Deep South, or, some older people in like certain Baptist groups, I don't think you'd find anybody that
Hmm.
takes it seriously. Certainly nobody teaching it in seminary anymore. So
Hmm.
in that sense, not enduring enough to be like really compelling. I think the idea is compelling, but it falls apart under scrutiny so quickly.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just even just a reading of the Bible. It's very hard to look at, the book of Acts and be like, ah, yes, look, a congregational polity. It's like, well, no, no, that's not what's happening. Like, no, you don't see Paul and Barnabas being like, well, we really wanted to do this, but the congregation voted us down, so we gotta, like so, come on, people. Anyway,
What were those deacons in Corinth doing?
yeah, right, exactly. So, but yeah, I mean, maybe that's a good place to cap this off. I always know when I'm done talking because I start repeating myself, but yeah. So it's been a weird time. I wish you and all your people well. Come to Dallas sometime. Come to church. Come visit Saint Seraphim sometime when you're down. Maybe the spirit will move. Who knows, Paul? Who
Who
knows?
knows? Who
Who knows?
knows? Keep hope
But
alive.
yeah, but in all seriousness, you should come to Dallas, and you should let me show you around the place.
I'm
And
sure it'll happen. There are a few people who have been one way or
yeah.
another trying to get an event going. I mean, again, I basically have 4 weeks a year where I can sort of use my council's given me 4 weeks
Oh,
where
right, of course, yeah.
I can go and do things. And of course,
Yeah.
most of these things happen on a weekend or over a weekend. So
You should I know there's a little estuary group on the east side of the DFW Metroplex. I've chatted with those guys. I actually bumped into them randomly at a Bach concert. We're at and which was great. But So those guys, maybe we can get something organized or whatever. But yeah, you should come to town sometime. We'll show you all the good barbecue and all of our C2 two CVs and yeah. Yeah,
CVs. Those darn Baptists.
that's right.
All right. Well, Richard, it was always great talking to you.
Thanks. I feel the same way. I know it's been a long one, but this has been a lot of fun for me, I hope. I have no
Yeah,
idea who will sit and watch something this long, honestly. What is wrong with you if you do? But you're here, so
they will. They
there are people
will.
who will. Yeah. Yep.
Very good. Well, you take care of yourself.
All right, you too.
And
And good luck with all the weddings and the travels and everything. Are you going? Are you going to like swing by the motherland like briefly on your way out?
the Netherlands?
Yeah.
No, no.
Oh.
I've been there the last 2 summers
Oh, okay. Well, psh,
for
whatever.
estuary things.
Whatever. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, so
Yeah.
this is strictly Italy this time. So
Okay.
should be
Well, have
cool.
a good time. Uh, 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 you know, give the Pavis my regards.
All right. I'll see. I'll see. If I bump into the Pope, I'll ask him, what about that thing that they just wrote?
Yeah.
Do you feel secure in your job? I know a lot of ministers, these
You
days.
know, what do you think the odds are that the Pope reads the documents that come out of the Vatican? I mean, like, that's a serious question. It's a massive apparatus. Like, what do you think the odds are the Pope has read every document that comes
This
out?
one, you'd think he'd pay a little
I
attention
don't
to.
know. I kind of because it was like a study document put out by some Vatican Institute or whatever. Like, I don't know. All I'm saying is I know for a fact that the people who passed laws in this country do not even read them because they didn't actually write them.
It's
And
true.
so I feel like what are the odds that the Pope has read every document the Vatican puts out? I think fairly low, but I could be wrong. Somebody out there, Vatican watchers, get in the comments.
Let us
Tackle
know.
Paul about this.
And what's with the Vatican ticket scalpers? This we need to know.
Oh yeah, but this is before the recording. But they should get the Taylor Swift people on the Vatican ticket situation because it sounds like she's, having invented ticketing, she's probably figured this out. So
the last thing I need in summertime in Italy is Taylor Swift. I mean, send her to places where tourists don't go in summer because we don't need the crowds. So
it's a great name for your memoir. It's the last thing I need in Italy in summertime
is
is
Taylor
Taylor
Swift.
Swift, a memoir. Full
Amen.
Candor Clay.
All right. Take
All
care,
right.
Richard.
Thanks.
All
Talk
right.
to you later. Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.